In the remote expanse of the Montana Rockies, dawn broke in a slow cascade of amber light, spilling across the frost-covered hills and pine-dotted valleys. Jack Maddox moved with practiced ease across his land, his boots crunching over the frozen grass as his German shepherd, Bruno, trotted loyally at his side. At 65, Jack looked every inch the weathered rancher, lean, strong, dressed in a flannel shirt, canvas vest, faded jeans, and a battered cowboy hat. His dark brown hair, streaked with gray, peeked from beneath the brim, and a short salt and pepper beard framed his rugged face. But behind his steel blue eyes was a watchfulness that went far beyond tending cattle or mending fences. Jack's cool-used fingers ran along the wooden post of his fence, eyes narrowing at the ground. He crouched without effort, his knees barely creaking as he studied a set of deep tire tracks etched in the mud. Bruno gave a low growl, the fur along his spine bristling. "Good boy," Jack murmured, patting the dog's broad head. His sharp eyes measured the tracks, thick treads, wide axles, and too fresh for the local ranchers, definitely not from the neighbors. His gut stirred, the way it had in countless foreign lands long before he ever called Montana home. The distant rumble of an old pickup echoed down the dirt road. Jack rose, dusting his jeans, and turned as Laura Benton's battered red Chevy came to a skidding stop near the gate. Laura, a woman in her late 40s, with sun-weathered skin and blonde hair tucked under a wool cap, jumped out, her face pale. "Jack, thank God you're out here," she called, breathless. Jack met her halfway, Bruno padding beside him. "Morning, Laura. You look like you've seen a ghost." Laura's hands trembled as she pushed her sunglasses up. "Have you heard about the Hendersons?" Jack's brow furrowed. "No. What about 'em?" "They're gone," Laura said sharply. "Left in the middle of the night, packed up. No warning. And this morning," she paused, glancing nervously at the road behind her. "There were men at their place, black SUVs, big guys, not locals, Jack." Jack's jaw tightened. He scanned the horizon, his brain clicking into old patterns. "Cartel." Laura's shoulders sagged, her voice dropping. "That's what people in town are saying. They've been moving up from the south, buying up farms. Those who don't sell," she hesitated, swallowing. "They push harder." Jack exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the morning air. "Have they approached you?" Laura shook her head, crossing her arms. "Not yet, but the Millers, they went last week. Same pattern. New buyers, too much money, too many threats. They're setting up distribution routes." "And Jack," her voice cracked slightly, "the sheriff can't handle this. He's overwhelmed. People are scared." Jack laid a hand on her arm, his voice calm. "Don't worry about me, Laura. I've dealt with worse." She managed a weak laugh, shaking her head. "I don't doubt it. But be careful. They're moving through this valley fast. It won't be long before they're at your door." As Laura drove away, Jack watched the truck disappear down the road, the rising sun casting long shadows behind her. He knelt beside Bruno, fingers brushing the big shepherd's fur. "Looks like the quiet life's about to get noisy, boy." He rose, his gaze sweeping across the valley, the barns, the house, the pastures. His land sat at the junction of three key routes, and he knew it wasn't just a ranch to the cartel. It was a choke point, a hub, a prize. Jack walked toward the barn, his boots silent on the frost-bitten ground. Inside, sunlight filtered through the cracked wood, casting strips of gold over hay bales and rusted tools. He reached the back corner, where a weathered wooden floorboard met an old workbench. With a practiced hand, Jack lifted the hidden hatch, revealing a metal ladder leading into a shadowed cellar. He climbed down, Bruno settling at the entrance, tail thumping once. The room below was a different world. Concrete walls, lined with racks of rifles, ammunition, tactical gear, radios, and satellite phones. Maps of the valley covered one wall, marked with notes in sharp black ink. Old paranoia, his friends had once called it. Jack called it being ready. He powered up a secure radio, fingers moving over the keys. A deep voice crackled through the static. "Jack, been a long time." "Reed," Jack said softly. "Time to cash in that favor you owe me." On the other end, Reed Knox let out a low whistle. "How bad?" "Cartels moving in. Already hit 3 farms. They'll be here soon." "Want the old crew?" Jack's mouth curved into a grim smile. "I want the best." One by one, the calls went out. Cyrus Alvarez, the demo wizard. Zane Voss, comms and electronic warfare. Nash Carter, medic and all-around survivor. They'd faced down warlords, terrorists, rogue armies. They were older now, but they were still the best. As the sun climbed, Jack emerged from the cellar, his heart steady. He walked the property, not as a rancher but as a commander. Every tree line, every slope, every fence post became a potential battlefield. He stood at the edge of his land, staring down the dirt road. Bruno sat beside him, ears perked. Jack ran a hand over the dog's head, eyes narrowing as a line of black SUVs crawled into view on the main road. "Showtime," Jack murmured. The black SUVs rolled down the gravel road, their tinted windows flashing in the morning light. Jack Maddox stood at the edge of his property, Bruno still at his side, calm but watchful. 3 vehicles came to a stop, just inside the gate. Dust settled in the cold air as 4 men emerged. Tall, broad, sharp suits that didn't belong in Montana. One of them, a lean man with slicked-back black hair, expensive sunglasses, and a tailored grey coat, stepped forward, a smooth grin on his face. "Good morning, sir," the man called, voice honeyed with charm. "Beautiful land you've got here." Jack's eyes flicked over them, reading their posture, their sidearms, the way they scanned the property behind their smiles. Bruno gave a quiet growl, low in his throat. Jack pulled off his hat, ran a gloved hand through his grey-streaked hair, and offered a tight smile. "Can I help you fellas with something?" The man laughed softly. "I hope so. Name's Arturo Vega. My associates and I represent a group interested in making you a very generous offer." Jack shifted his stance slightly, keeping his body relaxed, his mind razor-sharp, not looking to sell. "Oh, come now," Arturo said, spreading his arms. "Everybody has a price. And trust me, Mr. Maddox, ours is very, very good." Jack tilted his head. "You've done your research." Arturo's smile widened just a touch. "We make it a habit to know who we're dealing with. You're a smart man. You understand opportunity when it knocks." Jack slipped his hat back on, blue eyes steely under the brim.
Are you?
"Appreciate the visit, but this ranch isn't for sale." For a moment, the only sound was the wind sighing through the pines. Then Arturo's tone hardened. "I'd think it over, if I were you," he said quietly. "A lot of people in this valley are finding it difficult to stay independent these days. Accidents, break-ins, fires. It's such a shame." Jack's lips thinned into a line. "You threatening me, son?" Arturo gave a cold little laugh. "Not at all, just sharing observations." Bruno took a step forward, hackles raised. One of Arturo's men twitched toward his holster. Jack raised a hand, calm and unhurried. "Easy," Jack murmured to the dog. "We're all friends here." Arturo held Jack's gaze for a long beat, then flicked his fingers toward the cars. His men piled back inside, engines rumbling to life. "We'll be in touch," Arturo said smoothly. "Have a good day, Mr. Maddox." Jack stood perfectly still as the convoy pulled away, watching the dust trail snake over the horizon. Only when the last car was out of sight did he let out a slow breath. "Come on, boy," he murmured to Bruno. "Time to get serious." Inside the farmhouse, Jack stood at the kitchen window, phone in hand, watching the tree line. His thumb hovered over the contact marked Reed Knox. A voice crackled through the line almost instantly. "Yeah, Jack." "They're here," Jack said simply. A pause. Then, "You want the whole crew? Send 'em." "You got it." Jack ended the call, pocketing the phone. His fingers brushed a framed photo on the windowsill. A younger Jack in desert fatigues, flanked by Reed, Cyrus, Zane, and Nash, all grinning, dirt-streaked alive. He ran a thumb over the glass, then set it gently down. By evening, the valley had changed. Word spread like wildfire. Arturo Vega and his people had visited 3 more farms, flashing cash and promises. By nightfall, 2 families were packed and gone. Trailers hitched to trucks, kids bundled in back seats, eyes wide with fear. Jack watched from the porch as Laura pulled up again, her face pale and drawn. They hit the Millers and the Browns, she said without preamble. Jack, they're going to push until we're all gone. Jack nodded slowly. They're consolidating, turning the valley into a highway for whatever they're running. Laura wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the cold. What are you going to do? Jack's voice was quiet, unshakable. I'm going to hold the line. Laura hesitated, then stepped closer. Jack, you can't do this alone. A faint smile touched his mouth. I won't be. The next morning, they arrived. Reed Knox, the sharp-eyed sniper, with a permanent smirk and a limp from an old shrapnel wound. Cyrus Blaze Alvarez, the explosives genius with hands always moving, tapping, fiddling. Zane Whisper Voss, calm and quiet, the comms master, a ghost in the machine. And Nash Carter, the medic, big-hearted, barrel-chested, always with a cigarette hanging from his lips. The reunion was understated. Handshakes, claps on the back, a few dry jokes tossed around. Hell of a retirement you've got going, Jack, Reed drawled, glancing around. Looks cozy. Jack cracked a wry grin. Welcome to paradise. Cyrus whistled. Low, eyeing the map, spread over the kitchen table. They're coming heavy, huh? Yeah, Jack said quietly, and they won't stop until this valley's theirs. Zane tapped a finger on the map. We'll make sure they never get that far. Outside, Bruno barked sharply, tail wagging as he darted between the men. Nash leaned down, rubbing the dog's ears. Looks like you've already got the best soldier here. Jack watched them all, his old team battered but unbroken, sliding effortlessly back into the rhythm they'd once known. For the first time in days, the tight band around his chest loosened just a fraction. The sun dipped low, casting long golden rays across the valley. Jack stood on his porch, flanked by his team, watching the road. The battle was coming, and for the first time in a long time, Jack Maddox welcomed it. The wind was sharp that morning, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke across the valley. Jack Maddox stood at the edge of his porch, watching his old team unload gear from battered trucks. Reed Knox limped slightly as he stepped out, a tall, wiry figure with sharp features, salt and pepper hair cut close, and a faint scar cutting through his right eyebrow. His eyes were always moving, scanning, calculating. Place hasn't changed much, Reed said with a grin, adjusting the sniper rifle slung over his shoulder. Neither have you, Jack murmured, clapping him on the shoulder. Cyrus Blaze Alvarez tumbled out of the second truck, laughing as he nearly dropped a crate of C4. Stocky, olive-skinned, with curly black hair peppered with grey, Cyrus was never still, his hands always busy. Winding wires, flicking lighters, disassembling gadgets. Jesus, Jack, Cyrus said, grinning. You sure know how to throw a party. Zane Whisper Voss appeared next, his lean frame gliding out of the passenger seat. Dark-skinned, with a shaved head and an unreadable expression. Zane moved like smoke, his quiet presence making him easy to overlook, until it was too late. Nash Carter brought up the rear, a barrel-chested man with sun-weathered skin, sandy blonde hair gone silver at the temples, and kind, tired eyes. A cigarette dangled from the corner of his mouth as he hefted a duffel of medical supplies onto one shoulder. Don't tell me you called us in just to babysit a farm, Jack, Nash rumbled, his voice like gravel. Jack smiled faintly. Wouldn't dream of it. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen table was cleared, the map of the valley spread wide, covered in notes, pins, and hand-drawn lines. Bruno lay curled near the stove, eyes half closed but ears twitching at every sound. Jack leaned over the map, gesturing. They'll come from the south. 2 choke points here and here, he tapped, where the ridge narrows and the old logging road cuts through. Reed crouched beside him, studying the terrain. We put me here, he murmured, tapping the ridge. I'll have line of sight over both. Cyrus rubbed his hands together, eyes alight. And I can make sure the logging road's a one-way trip, if they're lucky. Zane quietly unfolded a laptop, satellite images flickering across the screen. We can jam their comms, blind their surveillance, make 'em deaf, dumb, and blind before they even reach the first gate. Nash flicked his cigarette into an old coffee mug, leaning against the wall. I'll set up triage near the barn. Not that I plan on patching any of us up. Jack straightened, looking at each of them in turn. They're going to come heavy, and they're going to come soon. We hold this ground, or this whole valley falls. Reed snorted. Hell, Jack, you had me at they're coming. The room filled with quiet chuckles, the easy, hard-earned humor of men who'd seen the worst and learned to laugh anyway. The rest of the day was a blur of movement. Reed scouted sniper nests along the ridge, his scope sweeping the tree line. Cyrus worked with the giddy focus of a child at Christmas, setting charges beneath the old logging road and camouflaging tripwires across narrow trails. Zane strung antennas and signal boosters from the barn's roof, tapping into Jack's old comms array, his fingers flying across keyboards. Nash set up the barn as a makeshift infirmary, sorting bandages, IVs, antibiotics, and morphine, his face calm and focused. Jack moved among them all, checking, adjusting, watching. He walked the perimeter of his land, boots crunching in frost-hardened dirt, Bruno at his side. His mind ticked like a metronome. Angles, ranges, fallback routes, bottlenecks. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, he paused at the edge of the south ridge, watching the forest below turn to a sea of shadow. Bruno sat at his feet, tail thumping once against the ground. Jack crouched, resting a hand on the dog's neck. We've been through worse, huh? Boy? Bruno leaned into him, warm and solid, his breath fogging in the cold air. That night, the farmhouse kitchen filled with the low murmur of conversation. The men sat around the table, sharing a meal like they had in dusty outposts and rain-soaked jungles years before. Cyrus leaned back in his chair, gesturing with a fork. Remember that time in Kandahar? Zane rigged that antenna out of spare car parts. And a coat hanger. Zane gave a rare, small smile. It worked. Reed raised his glass. To miracles. Nash leaned forward, elbows on the table. To coming home in one piece. Jack lifted his own glass, voice quiet but firm. To finishing what we started. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp in the stillness. Later, when the others had drifted to their bunks, Jack remained on the porch, staring into the moonlit night. Bruno pressed against his leg, the air cold and clean. Jack's hand tightened briefly on the dog's ruff. His heart was steady, his mind clear. He had no illusions about what was coming, but for the first time in years he felt alive. As a faint rumble echoed from the southern hills, Jack's lips curved into a hard, quiet smile. Let's show 'em how it's done, boy. The morning air was crisp, and a thin layer of frost glazed the pasture grass. Jack Maddox stood at the edge of his porch, coffee mug warming his hands. Bruno sat at his feet, ears perked, eyes fixed on the road below. A distant sound, low, mechanical, rhythmic, floated up the valley. Jack stiffened. He set the mug on the rail and pulled a pair of old binoculars from his jacket pocket. Raising them, he adjusted the focus until the shapes came clear. 3 black SUVs gliding up the gravel road, smooth as sharks slicing through dark water. Showtime, Jack muttered. He turned, whistling sharply. Reed emerged from the barn loft, rifle slung across his back. Cyrus poked his head out from behind a stack of crates near the shed. Zane was already watching from the barn roof, headphones around his neck, laptop balanced on his knee. Nash leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his weathered face. Jack gave a single nod. They melted into position. The SUVs came to a stop just beyond the gate. The engines idled, low and throaty. Doors opened in perfect coordination. Out stepped Arturo Vega, sunglasses gleaming despite the overcast sky, tailored grey coat immaculate, flanked by 4 bodyguards in black jackets, their hands twitching near their belts. Jack approached the gate at an unhurried pace. Bruno walked beside him, his movements fluid but alert. "Good morning, Mr. Maddox," Arturo called, voice smooth as silk. "I hope we didn't catch you too early." Jack rested one hand on the top rail. "You again." Arturo smiled, the corners of his mouth sharp. "I'm disappointed, Jack." "May I call you Jack? We offered you a generous deal, but you never returned our call." Jack tilted his head, his weathered face unreadable. "You call it a deal, I call it a threat." Arturo's smile widened. "Threats are so ugly. I prefer to think of them as incentives." Bruno let out a low, rumbling growl. One of the bodyguards shifted, hand twitching toward his jacket. Jack's eyes flicked there, then back to Arturo. "Easy," Jack murmured to Bruno, his voice soft but edged with steel. Arturo adjusted his cuffs, stepping forward. "Here's how this is going to go, Jack. You take our offer. You walk away with more money than you'll ever spend. You and your charming dog live to enjoy it. Or," he paused, slipping off his sunglasses, "we come back tonight, and tomorrow, and the next day, until there's nothing left but ashes." Jack gazed at him for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "Well," he said softly, "I appreciate the clarity." Without looking, he raised 2 fingers slightly. A sharp, metallic click sounded from the barn, another from the trees, the unmistakable snick of a rifle bolt sliding home. Arturo's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. "You sure you want to play this hand, friend?" Jack murmured. Arturo's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." Jack's voice didn't change. "Last man who called me a bluffer's still limping." For a moment, the cold wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Arturo gave a soft, humorless laugh, slipping his sunglasses back on. "We'll be in touch." He turned on his heel. The bodyguards hesitated, eyes darting toward the trees, the barn, the house. Then they followed. Doors slammed, engines roared to life. The SUVs rolled away in a spray of gravel. Jack watched them go, arms folded loosely over his chest. Reed's voice crackled softly over the earpiece in Jack's ear. "They spooked easy." "They're measuring us," Jack murmured. "They'll be back." Cyrus came jogging up from the shed, grinning. "Man, did you see that one guy's face when the rifle clicked? I swear he peed a little." Nash walked over, lighting a cigarette with cupped hands. "They're professionals. They'll be back, better prepared." Jack ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "So will we?" Later, in the barn, Jack spread out a new map on the workbench. Zane pulled satellite images onto his laptop, overlaying them with the paper map. "They've got resources," Zane murmured, fingers flying over the keys. "If they're smart, they'll hit us from 3 sides next time." "Then we control what's smart," Jack said quietly. Cyrus leaned over the map, tapping a finger on a narrow trail near the creek. "I can rig this with a surprise. That'll slow their flank." Reed traced a line along the ridge. "And I can put a bullet in anyone thinking about scaling this slope." Nash looked up from sorting medkits. "And I'll be ready for the mess." Jack looked at each of them in turn, his face somber. "They don't think we're anything but old men with old guns. Let's prove 'em wrong." Bruno thumped his tail once against the barn floor. That evening, as the sun bled into the hills and the first stars pricked the sky, Jack sat on the porch with Bruno. The soft creak of the rocking chair was the only sound. He sipped from a battered tin cup, eyes fixed on the darkening road. He thought of the families who'd fled, of the way the valley used to be, a place where neighbors shared fences, not battle plans. Bruno lifted his head, ears flicking. Yeah, Jack murmured, setting the cup down. I hear it too. Far off. Engines growled. Jack stood, his silhouette sharp against the last streaks of orange sky. He reached down, resting his hand on Bruno's neck. Time to remind them whose land this is. The farmhouse creaked in the cold as night tightened its grip on the valley. Jack Maddox moved through the darkened halls with a quiet, purposeful step. Bruno's claws clicked softly behind him on the worn wooden floors, the dog shadowing his every move. In the kitchen, the light above the old stove was the only glow in the house. Jack paused beside the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. The barn loomed across the field, dark and still. Beyond it, pine trees lined the hills like sentinels, their branches rattling softly in the wind. He turned away and crossed to the pantry door. But instead of reaching for food, he reached for the floor, fingers finding a small knot in the wood. A sharp twist, a muted click, and a panel lifted. Beneath it, a steel handle. Jack pulled. The section of floor swung up, revealing a narrow staircase that disappeared into black. Bruno padded to the edge, ears up, tail wagging slightly. Come on, boy, Jack murmured. They descended. The basement was a world apart. Concrete walls lined with shelves heavy with ammunition crates, weapons, tactical gear. Along one side, a long wooden bench stacked with maps, radios, and satellite phones. Old army footlockers sat beneath, their surfaces scarred and dented from a lifetime of use. Jack moved with muscle memory, flicking on a single overhead bulb. Its pale glow lit up the heart of his preparation. He knelt before one of the crates, flipping the latches open. Inside, carefully oiled rifles, each wrapped in cloth. He unrolled one, a precision sniper rifle, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. Bruno sat nearby, eyes following Jack's hands. Jack laid the rifle on the bench, then opened another case. A black tactical vest, still marked with faint desert dust. His fingers brushed over the faded patch on the chest. A wolf's head, jaws bared. He closed his eyes for a moment. Old ghosts stirred. Upstairs, the team had gathered in the kitchen. Reed sat on a stool near the window, cleaning his rifle. Cyrus rummaged through a canvas bag of wires, timers and detonators, humming under his breath. Zane sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on his knees, headphones over his ears. Nash leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, watching the room. Jack climbed the stairs, set down a crate on the table, and flipped it open. Reed let out a low whistle. Damn, Jack, you've been busy. Jack's mouth tugged into a brief smile. Call it a hobby, Cyrus grinned, pulling out a block of C4. You've got all the toys, old man. Zane pushed his headphones down around his neck. We'll need the boosters for the South Ridge. Their comms will be better than we thought. Nash unrolled a medical kit. Let's hope we won't need all this, he murmured. Jack looked over them all. We hold the line. We push back hard enough. They rethink everything. Reed tapped the sniper scope. They're used to dealing with farmers and sheriff's deputies. Not us. Jack's voice was quiet. Let's make sure they learn the difference. The next morning broke cold and grey. Frost rimmed the fence posts, and the sun struggled to burn through a low ceiling of cloud. Out in the barn, Jack and his team worked without wasted motion. Reed climbed to the hayloft, nestling into a sniper's nest. With a perfect view of the road, his sharp eyes scanned the tray line, every movement recorded and measured. Cyrus strung wires along the south fence, crouched low in the grass. His fingers moved with care, every twist precise. Zane installed a signal booster atop the barn, his quiet murmuring barely audible as he checked frequencies. Nash set up a triage area in the corner of the barn, laying out supplies with a medic's calm, efficient hands. And Jack moved among them, his eyes everywhere, noting every trap, every fallback route, every angle. Bruno shadowed him closely, tail wagging when Jack paused to kneel and rub his ears. As the day wore on, Jack walked the perimeter one last time. He paused at the north ridge, looking out across the valley. Pines whispered in the wind, cattle grazed in the distance, unaware of the storm building around them. Jack crouched beside a freshly dug foxhole, smoothing the dirt with his hand. His gaze swept the horizon, calculating, measuring. His mind ticked through ranges, cover, blind spots. He reached down, resting a hand on Bruno's head. "Old boy," Jack murmured. "They think they're walking into a ranch. They don't know they're walking into a war zone." Bruno gave a soft waff, pressing closer. That night, the farmhouse lights were dark. From the ridge, Reed watched through his scope as headlights flickered in the distance, weaving down the valley road. Over the radio, his voice came soft and steady. "Jack, we've got company." Jack stood on the porch, arms folded, eyes sharp. Cyrus's voice crackled in next. Charges set. Zane's calm murmur followed. "Who's ready?" Nash exhaled quietly, stretching his shoulders. "Let's dance." Jack reached down, scratched Bruno behind the ears. Time to get to work. The moon hung low over the Montana hills, casting a cold silver glow across the valley. The farmhouse was quiet, but inside, the air crackled with focus and quiet tension. Jack Maddox leaned over the kitchen table, the map spread beneath his weathered hands. Beside him, Reed Knox, Cyrus Alvarez, Zane Voss, and Nash Carter stood shoulder to shoulder, studying the lines, ridges, and markings Jack had drawn. Bruno lay under the table, chin resting on his paws, amber eyes flicking between the men. Jack traced a finger across the map. "They'll come from the south first, fast and loud. Reed, you'll have the ridge. Pick your targets." Reed's lips curled into a sharp grin. "I'll make 'em dance." His salt and pepper hair glinted in the dim kitchen light, his scarred eyebrow twitching slightly as he bent to check the sniper rifle slung across his back. Jack nodded. "Cyrus, you're the backbreaker. I want that old logging road turned into a graveyard." Cyrus chuckled, rolling his sleeves up over his tattooed forearms. His olive skin gleamed faintly with sweat as he unpacked blocks of C4 onto the counter. "Boom, baby. Leave it to me." Jack shifted his gaze to Zane. "I need eyes, ears, and silence. Cut their comms. No one gets a clean signal in or out." Zane gave a silent nod, dark eyes calm, his dark skin catching the faint glow of the laptop screen he never set down. "Already patching into their frequency bands," he murmured. "Nash," Jack continued, "you're my fallback. If we have wounded, they come to you, and if I go down—" Nash lifted a hand, cutting him off. The big medic leaned forward, bracing his arms on the table, sandy blonde grey hair brushing his forehead. "You're not going down, old man. But if you do, I've got you." For a moment, the room was still. Then Jack's mouth tugged into a faint smile. "Glad to have you boys back." The team spread out to prepare. Reed climbed the slope behind the barn, his long frame slipping between trees, as though born to them. He found the sniper's nest Jack had built years ago, checked the sight lines, and settled in. Through the scope, the valley spread below, moonlit and waiting. Cyrus knelt by the old road, fingers moving deftly as he set charges beneath loose earth and rocks. He hummed under his breath, the same song he always hummed when laying traps. "You want to play rough?" he whispered. "Let's play rough." Zane strung a slender antenna from the barn roof, typing rapidly as his laptop processed signal noise. With each keystroke, cartel radios down the valley crackled and fell silent, their channels jammed. Nash turned the corner of the barn into a triage area, laying out bandages, syringes, splints, and morphine. He ran a practiced hand over each, checking inventory by touch as much as by sight, and Jack walked the perimeter, Bruno at his heel, his gaze sweeping every fence line, every tree shadow. His hand rested on the dog's head as he murmured, "You ready, old boy? Bruno wagged his tail once, his breath misting in the cold air. By midnight, the team regrouped by the porch. Reed leaned against a post, adjusting his scope. Cyrus crouched by the steps, rechecking detonators. Zane sat cross-legged, laptop balanced on his knees, headphones pulled down around his neck. Nash leaned against the railing, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. Jack stepped out, coffee mug in hand, his sharp blue eyes sweeping across his team. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Reed chuckled. "You kidding? This is the most fun I've had in years." So Cyrus grinned. "We were retired. Now we're legendary." Zane gave a rare, dry smile. "Better than staring at a computer in DC." Nash exhaled smoke, eyes glinting. "We were never made for quiet lives." Jack looked down at Bruno. "Neither were we. Huh, boy?" The shepherd gave a soft bark, ears flicking. An hour before dawn, the first sound reached them. A distant engine, low and steady. Reed's voice came over the radio, calm as a whisper. 2 SUVs. South Road, closing fast. Cyrus's fingers twitched, brushing the detonator in his jacket pocket. "They're early." Jack's voice crackled back. "Let him come." Zane's laptop pulsed with light, code flickering as he hacked into the local cell towers. "They won't call for help when this goes sideways." Nash pulled on a heavy vest, tucking syringes into pockets. "Showtime." Jack stood at the porch rail, arms folded, eyes narrowed. The sun had not yet risen, but the horizon glowed faintly, an edge of gold against the deep blue sky. "They don't know what's waiting for them," Jack murmured. Behind him, Bruno stood at attention, tail raised, muscles tight. The moment arrived. Reed's voice came soft and precise. "They're on the road. 30 seconds. Jack glanced at Cyrus. A demolitions man gave a grin and tapped his detonator. "Welcome to Montana," Cyrus whispered. The sun was just a whisper of gold behind the mountains when Jack Maddox and his team moved into final preparations. The frost had not yet melted off the ground, and the air bit cold against their faces as they worked. Jack strode along the main road, his boots crunching softly over frozen gravel. Bruno padded at his heel, nose close to the ground, sniffing along the trail. Jack's eyes swept the land with a commander's precision, every stone and tree memorized. "Reed," Jack called over the radio. "Report." From the high ridge above the barn, Reed Knox's voice came back smooth and steady. "Sniper nest locked in, range markers set. They come down the south road. I'll have 'em in my sights before they hit the fence." Jack gave a quiet grunt of approval. "Cyrus," from a clump of brush near the creek, Cyrus Alvarez's cheerful voice crackled through. "Road set to blow. Tripwires, buried charges, fun little surprises. They'll never see it coming." "Zane." "Come so dark on their side," Zane Voss murmured from inside the barn, fingers flying over his laptop. "They're running blind." "Jack." "Nash." The medic leaned against the barn door, thumbs hooked into his vest straps. "Ready for hell?" Nash Carter rumbled, "But I'd rather nobody end up on my table." Jack smirked faintly, watching Bruno sniff the fence line. "Let's make sure we keep it that way." The morning hours passed in a quiet rhythm of preparation. Reed checked his angles, adjusting his scope with the finesse of an artist. The sniper rifle rested snugly on its bipod, its barrel pointed downhill toward the narrow approach road. Every breath Reed took was measured, calm, unshakable. Cyrus moved like a fox along the old logging road, his hands quick and sure as he set the final charges. He whistled, a quiet tune as he planted a claymore behind a fallen log, then dusted snow over the trigger wire. In the barn, Zane hunched over his equipment, monitoring radio traffic from the approaching convoy. His dark eyes flicked from screen to screen, his fingers a blur. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. South Ridge, 20 minutes out, he murmured into the mic. Nash worked in the shade of the barn, laying out his medical gear with military precision. Bandages, morphine, tourniquets, field dressings. He patted the pockets of his vest, counting supplies, lips moving silently as he checked and rechecked his inventory. Jack walked the perimeter with Bruno, his sharp blue eyes sweeping every corner, where others saw a quiet ranch. Jack saw a battlefield. Every slope, every fence, every thicket, a tool to be used. Old boy, Jack murmured, crouching beside Bruno and rubbing his thick neck. They're walking right into our hands. By noon, the valley was still and waiting. Reed shifted slightly in his nest, eyes on the approaching dust cloud far down the road. Jack, he murmured through the radio. We got movement. 3 SUVs, 2 trucks, coming in slow. Jack stood on the porch, watching through binoculars. Bruno sat at his side, head tilted, ears twitching. Everyone ready? Ready, came Cyrus's voice. Ready? Zane confirmed. Ready. Nash finished quietly. Jack gave a single, sharp nod. We hold this line. The first SUV nosed around the bend, tires crunching over gravel. A second followed, then a third. Behind them 2 pickup trucks, their beds loaded with men holding rifles, bounced along the uneven road. Cyrus's voice was almost gleeful over the radio. Wait for it. Wait for it. Reed adjusted his grip on the rifle, steadying his breath. Call it, Jack. Jack watched as the convoy reached the choke point Cyrus had rigged. He saw the lead SUV's tires roll over the buried charge. Light it, Jack said softly. Cyrus pressed the detonator. The explosion ripped through the morning quiet, a geyser of dirt and flame blasting the lead SUV off the road. The truck behind it swerved, skidding into a ditch. Shouts rang out as the cartel soldiers spilled from the trucks, scrambling for cover. Reed fired once, clean and sharp, dropping the man barking orders. The others froze, panicked. In the barn, Zane jammed their radios, cutting their shouts to each other into chaos. Jack's voice cut across the radio, calm and commanding. No mercy, boys. Shut them down. Bruno lunged to Jack's side, barking sharply. In the chaos, the second truck tried to back away, spinning tires in the gravel. Cyrus triggered the secondary charge, flipping the vehicle onto its side with a deafening roar. Men scrambled from the wreckage, some crawling, some running. Reed picked them off, one by one, cool and unhurried. Jack watched through the binoculars, tracking every movement. His heart pounded steady in his chest, his mind sharp as a blade. Zane, Jack called. What's the chatter? Zane's voice came back, calm as ever. They're blind. No one's answering on their side. We own the board. Jack exhaled. Good. As the dust settled, the remaining cartel soldiers scrambled for the tree line, but Jack's team held their ground. Bruno barked once, sharp and fierce, as Jack stepped down from the porch, rifle slung casually over one shoulder. We gave 'em their warning, Jack said softly into the radio. Let's clean up. Smoke drifted through the valley, curling in thin grey ribbons above the splintered remains of the cartel convoy. Jack Maddox moved down the hill with Bruno at his side, boots crunching over frozen earth, rifle resting against his shoulder. His sharp blue eyes swept the wreckage. A burning SUV in the ditch. A pickup truck flipped on its side, and scattered men crawling or limping toward the trees. Status, Jack murmured into his radio. Sniper clear, Reed Knox's voice crackled softly. No more movement at the ridge. Charges spent, came Cyrus Alvarez's satisfied voice. I'm watching the back trail. Comms locked. Zane Voss confirmed. They are deaf. Nash Carter added last, calm and steady. No injuries on our end. I'll check the wounded if you want 'em breathing. Jack gave a sharp nod. Hold position. Let's see what roaches crawl out. Jack approached the wreckage cautiously, Bruno pacing in a wide arc, nose to the ground. A cartel fighter lay groaning near the flipped truck, clutching a bloodied leg. Another staggered from the tray line, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. His rifle hung forgotten at his side. Don't shoot. Don't shoot, the man cried in Spanish, stumbling forward. Jack raised his hand, fingers flicking in a silent signal. Bruno lunged forward with a warning bark, teeth bared. The man froze, trembling, eyes darting to the snarling shepherd. Jack lowered his rifle just slightly. "Drop it," he ordered. The man tossed the rifle to the ground, chest heaving. Behind him, Cyrus emerged from the trees, pistol raised. "You want him alive, boss," Jack considered. "For now." The man sank to his knees, hands on his head, mumbling prayers. Jack crouched beside him. Bruno pressed close, the dog's low growl a steady warning. Jack's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Who sent you?" The man shivered. Felix Ruiz." Jack's jaw tightened. He glanced at Cyrus. "Get the others secured. Strip the weapons. Nash, you're up." In the barnyard, Nash knelt beside the injured cartel fighters, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he tied off tourniquets and checked for fractures. "I don't patch scum for free," he muttered under his breath. "But I won't let a man bleed out, either." Zane sat nearby, headphones pulled over one ear, listening to the garbled chatter on the cartel's fallback frequencies. "I know something's wrong," he murmured. "They're regrouping down the highway." Reed's voice floated over the radio. "Jack, we've got eyes on a second convoy. Bigger. Heavies. ETA under an hour." Jack exhaled slowly. He crouched, tying the last of the prisoners' hands behind their backs with zip ties. Bruno watched every move, ears pricked, body tense. "We've rattled their cage," Jack said into the mic. "Now let's see how they bite." The team regrouped at the farmhouse. Cyrus cleaned the dirt from under his fingernails, sitting cross-legged on the porch steps. Reed appeared from the tree line, sniper rifle slung over his back, sweat dampening his salt and pepper hair despite the cold. Zane worked in a quiet corner, patching a fresh antenna into his laptop, while Nash poured water over his blood-stained hands at the outdoor pump. Jack spread a new map on the table. "We've got an hour, maybe less," he said calmly. "They're not going to come soft next time. Armored trucks, heavier weapons, maybe air support." Cyrus cracked his knuckles, grinning. "Good." I was getting bored. Reed raised an eyebrow. "We'll need to thin the herd before they hit the house." Zane tapped a point on the map. "Old cattle trail here. We can bottleneck them." Nash rolled his shoulders. "Just keep the wounded coming to me one at a time. I only have 2 hands." Jack's steel blue eyes swept over his team. "Hold this ground." "We remind them that this valley isn't theirs." Bruno let out a low bark, tail wagging once. Jack smirked faintly. "Good boy." As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long golden rays over the bloodied valley, the team moved into new positions. Reed took the high ridge again, his rifle resting against his shoulder as he scanned the far road. His breath came slow and even, a sniper's breath, his body still as stone. Cyrus checked the detonators hidden beneath the north fence line, whistling softly as he worked. "Boom goes the bad guys," he muttered cheerfully. Zane sat cross-legged in the barn, fingers flying across his keyboard. Static hummed in his earpiece as he tracked the approaching vehicles. Nash leaned against the barn wall, cigarette tucked behind his ear, his medical kit laid out neatly at his feet. And Jack stood on the porch, Bruno at his side, watching as a fresh cloud of dust rose on the horizon. "They're coming," Zane murmured. Jack reached down, resting a calloused hand on Bruno's thick neck. "Let's finish this." The afternoon light faded quickly, sinking behind the jagged ridge, casting the valley in cold blue shadow. From the ridge above, Reed Knox adjusted the scope of his sniper rifle, one eye pressed to the glass, the other scanning the horizon. His breath misted in the air as his whisper crackled through the radio. "Jack, we've got movement. 5 vehicles this time. Looks like a command truck in the middle." On the porch below, Jack Maddox stood still, Bruno pressed against his leg. His steel blue eyes narrowed as he lowered the binoculars. "Let them get close, boys. We want them deep in the net." Cyrus Alvarez crouched behind the stone wall that edged the logging road, fingers resting lightly on the detonator. His olive skin glowed faintly in the fading light, a grin pulling at his lips. This is going to be one hell of a fireworks show. Inside the barn, Zane Voss murmured into his headset, fingers flying across his keyboard. "They're blind, Jack. No signals, no drones, no eyes on us, just the old-fashioned kind of trouble." Nash Carter rolled his shoulders, tying off a bandage on one of the wounded cartel prisoners. "Better be sure, gentlemen," he rumbled, voice calm, "because I'm not sewing us back together if this goes sideways." The engines grew louder. A snarl of approaching power. 5 vehicles rumbled into view. 3 armored SUVs, a command truck bristling with antennas, and a black pickup with a mounted machine gun. Jack watched them roll toward the narrow stretch of road Cyrus had rigged with layered charges. "They're in position," Reed whispered. "Ready on your call." Jack raised his radio, his voice cool and steady. "Cyrus." A sharp, delighted laugh came through the channel. "With pleasure, boss." Cyrus's thumb pressed the detonator. The earth heaved. The lead SUV vanished in a bloom of dirt and flame, the force of the blast flipping it sideways like a toy. The second slammed into the wreck, crumpling with a metallic screech. The command truck swerved wildly, trying to avoid the carnage, just as the second line of charges lit up beneath its wheels, lifting it clear off the road before crashing down in a heap of twisted metal. Gunfire cracked through the air. The men in the back of the pickup truck scrambled, firing blind toward the tray line. Reed's rifle coughed softly. Once, twice, 3 times, 3 men dropped before their shouts even reached the barn. Cyrus emerged from cover, pistol in hand, grinning as he sprinted toward the chaos. "Jack, you're gonna want to see this." Jack moved fast, boots thudding over the frozen ground, Bruno bounding at his side, Zane's calm voice tracked in his ear. "Remaining hostiles are scattered. No coordinated retreat. They're panicking." Jack skidded to a stop beside Cyrus, crouching behind a half-flipped truck. Bruno pressed close, teeth bared. Smoke curled around them as the command truck belched black fire into the sky. "See that?" Cyrus pointed, grinning wide. "That's a tactical nightmare." Jack leaned out, watching as the cartel soldiers scrambled, some trying to drag wounded comrades, others ditching their weapons and sprinting toward the trees. "Take prisoners if you can," Jack ordered quietly. "But if they raise a gun, you know what to do." Reed picked off targets with surgical precision. Never wasting a round, the pickup truck's gunner tried to pivot the heavy machine gun toward the farmhouse, but his head snapped back as Reed's bullet found its mark. Zane fed real-time updates across the radio. "2 on your left, Jack. 3 circling wide. Cyrus. Nash, you've got 1 heading toward the barn." Nash emerged from the barn doorway, shotgun raised. The cartel fighter never had a chance. 1 sharp command from Nash, 1 stumble from the man, and it was over without a shot fired. Jack advanced carefully, Bruno at his heel, sweeping the wreckage. He moved like a shadow through the smoke, shoulders low, rifle raised, eyes sharp. Near the edge of the road, a man burst from the underbrush, gun raised. But Bruno lunged first, teeth sinking into the attacker's arm, yanking him off balance. Jack closed in, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's chest, driving the air from his lungs. Jack cuffed him with a zip tie, murmuring under his breath, "Not today, amigo." The last shots faded into the valley. Reed's voice came soft across the radio. Clear. Cyrus exhaled, chest heaving with laughter. "Well, that was fun." Zane added, "No more signals on approach. For now." Jack straightened, brushing dust from his vest, Bruno circling back to heel at his side. His blue eyes scanned the battlefield. Smoking vehicles, scattered weapons, moaning survivors. He raised the radio again. "Regroup at the house. And get ready." This was just round 1. By the time the sun slipped behind the mountains, the team stood together on the porch, silent. Nash leaned on the railing, watching as Jack walked the perimeter one last time. Reed cleaned his rifle by the fire pit. Cyrus fiddled with a fresh line of detonators. Zane sat cross-legged with his laptop, eyes narrowed at the flickering screen. Bruno trotted ahead of Jack, tail wagging faintly, his breath steaming in the cold air. Jack paused, hand resting on Bruno's neck, his eyes fixed on the tree line, where the last of the smoke faded into night. "They'll send more," Jack murmured. "They always do." Bruno pressed closer, warm and solid against his leg. Jack's jaw tightened. "Let them." The Montana night fell cold and silent. Smoke from the burning convoy still drifted across the road, curling into the pine trees like fading ghosts. Jack Maddox crouched near the wreckage, Bruno pressed tight to his side, the dog's ears flicking in every direction. The air tasted of burnt rubber and damp earth. Jack's sharp blue eyes stayed fixed on the tree line beyond the battlefield. Over the radio, Reed Knox's voice was a low whisper. "Jack?" "They're here." Jack's fingers tightened on the rifle. "Where?" Reed's reply was calm but edged. "Flanks. Both sides. Small units. Moving fast. They're trying to pin you in." Inside the barn, Zane Voss's voice cut in through the headset. "Jack, I just picked up new comms traffic. They're calling in the Phantom." Jack's chest tightened slightly. "Oh, Phantasma," Zane murmured. "Their enforcer. Last unit we faced like this. Half the country disappeared afterward." Jack exhaled slowly. "Copy. Hold positions." In the dark, figures moved, quick, lean shapes flitting between trees, circling the farm from both sides. Reed, tucked into his sniper nest, squeezed off 2 shots. One body crumpled near the creek. Another stumbled against a tree, dropping its rifle. Cyrus Alvarez hunkered low near the southern fence, fingers twitching over the next detonator. "Tell me when, Jack," he whispered, a grin pulling at the corners of his mouth. Zane's voice was crisp, calm. 5 closing from the east, another 4 from the ridge. They're using thermal switching to silent mode. Nash Carter, just outside the barn, chambered a shell into his shotgun, his big frame tense in the moonlight. "I'll cover the door." Jack rose to a crouch, Bruno following. His mind raced, not with panic, but with calculation. Reed, keep their heads down. Cyrus, be ready to light up the south. Nash, fall back to the barn. Zane, lock their comms. On it, they echoed back. Jack darted forward, moving between smoking wrecks and fallen logs with the smooth, deadly precision of a man who had done this in jungles, deserts, and ruined cities. Bruno stayed at his heel, muscles coiled, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A shadow peeled from the trees, a tall figure with a black ski mask and a suppressed rifle. The man raised his weapon. Bruno lunged, jaws closing on the attacker's arm, dragging him down with a yelp of surprise. Jack was already there, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's face, snapping his head back with a wet crack. Reed's voice came soft through the headset.
"Jack, I've got eyes on the Phantom."
For a moment, the world seemed to narrow. "Where?" Jack breathed. "North Ridge." Big man, black coat, moving like he owns the place. Not afraid. Jack glanced toward the tree line. "You have the shot." Silence. "No," Reed admitted. "Not yet." Jack's mouth tightened. "Stay sharp." Suddenly, the southern fence erupted in flame. Cyrus's charges blowing a wave of earth and smoke into the night. Screams followed as cartel soldiers were hurled backward, weapons flying from their hands. Cyrus's laughter crackled over the radio. "That'll slow 'em down." But through the chaos, 3 shadows sprinted low, fast, slipping past the blast zone. Jack swung up his rifle, squeezing off 2 sharp shots. 1 down, 2 down. Bruno tore after the third, teeth flashing white in the moonlight. The third man never made it past the barn wall. In the barnyard, Nash faced his own test. A figure rushed him, machete raised. Nash sidestepped smoothly, one arm slamming up to trap the attacker's wrist. the other driving the butt of his shotgun into the man's gut. As the man doubled over, Nash yanked the weapon up, driving the attacker face first into the ground. "Stay down," Nash muttered, planting a boot between the man's shoulder blades. "Back on the ridge," Reed whispered. "Jack, he's here." Jack froze. From the north ridge emerged a massive figure, a man in black combat gear, coat flaring behind him, dark hair slicked back, eyes hidden behind mirrored glasses. A thick scar ran from his temple to his jaw, jagged and pale against his tan skin. El Fantasma. He moved with slow precision, not ducking, not rushing. He strode like a man used to walking through gunfire. Jack's voice was quiet in the mic. "Everyone hold. No one takes that shot unless it's clean." The Phantom stopped at the edge of the ridge, hands folding behind his back. Through the scope, Reed's finger hovered on the trigger. "I can take him." Jack's voice came cold and sharp. "No, wait." The Phantom's head turned slightly, as if he sensed the crosshairs on his chest. He smiled, a small, knowing curve of the mouth. And then, without a word, he raised a hand and gestured once, sharp and commanding. More figures poured from the tree line, 10, maybe 12, dark shapes flooding the lower slope. Jack murmured into the radio, "Here we go." In a blur of motion, the farmyard erupted in battle. Reed fired from the ridge, precise and deadly, cutting through the first wave. Cyrus sprinted between cover points, tossing flashbangs and grenades, his laughter wild in the crackling radio feed. Nash hauled wounded men clear, shouting orders over the noise. Zane worked the comms, jamming, hacking, throwing roadblocks into the cartel's attempts to coordinate. And Jack? Jack was the storm. He moved through the battlefield, with Bruno at his side, rifle barking sharp commands, fists and boots when they closed too near. Every step was measured, every shot counted. And through it all, from the top of the ridge, the Phantom watched calm, unshaken, waiting for his moment. The night roared with gunfire, flashes of muzzle light splitting the dark as chaos engulfed the valley. But amidst the mayhem, Jack Maddox moved with sharp, deliberate precision. Bruno tight at his side, his steel blue eyes locked on the black command truck still smoldering near the tray line. Zane's calm voice came through Jack's earpiece. "Jack, I traced their main comm channel. Felix Ruiz is still alive. Command truck. Looks like he's trying to call a retreat." Jack's jaw tightened. Felix Ruiz, the cartel commander, under El Fantasma, the brain behind the local operations. If they could pull him out, they could break the spine of this entire push. "Copy," Jack murmured. "Cyrus, I need a breach point." Cyrus's laughter crackled in. "Oh, I've got one for you." At the shattered convoy, Felix shouted into a radio, his face slick with sweat, hair disheveled, suit stained with smoke. "Retirada. Pull back. Pull." The radio spat static and went dead. A sudden blast rocked the side of the command truck, throwing Felix hard against the door. When the smoke cleared, Jack stood there, rifle lowered, expression cold. Bruno bared his teeth at Felix's feet, a low growl rolling from deep in his chest. Felix scrambled backward, eyes wide. "Who the hell are you?" Jack stepped in slowly, voice calm. "The man you should have researched before you came here." Felix lunged for his pistol, and Bruno shot forward, teeth clamping on Felix's wrist. The gun clattered to the ground, Felix shrieking in pain. In a flash, Jack crossed the distance, slammed the man face first onto the hood, and zip-tied his hands behind his back. Through the headset, Zane reported, "Jack, we've got pockets of resistance falling back, but they're stalling, waiting on a signal." Jack leaned close to Felix's ear. "Call them off." Felix spat blood, trembling. "You're dead. You're all dead. Il Fantasma's coming." Jack's voice dropped to a cold whisper. "Call them off." Felix swallowed hard, his eyes darting wildly. Back at the barn, Reed took position on the roof, eyes scanning through his scope. Nash worked quickly over a wounded cartel soldier, murmuring under his breath, "Should have picked another line of work, kid." Cyrus jogged in, breathless, grinning wide. "How's our guest of honor?" Jack turned as Cyrus approached, pushing Felix to his knees at the edge of the farmyard. Bruno circled, tongue lolling, but his amber eyes never left the prisoner. Cyrus whistled low. "That's the face of a man having a very bad day." Jack pulled a knife from his belt, cutting the comms unit from Felix's jacket. He handed it to Zane, who was already crouched over his laptop. Let's see what he was whispering to his friends. Felix snarled up at Jack. "You think this ends with me? The Phantom's already here." Jack crouched slowly, meeting Felix's bloodshot eyes. "Good. Tell him I'm waiting." Felix paled, his breath catching in his throat. Across the radio, Reed's quiet voice came through. "Jack, got movement. Ridge. They're watching. Waiting." Jack looked toward the ridge, where a tall figure in black stood still, barely visible between the trees. El Fantasma, observing like a patient predator. Jack murmured, "Let him watch." They dragged Felix inside the barn, tying him to a post. Nash, brushing soot from his sleeves, shook his head as he passed. "Man like that doesn't usually end up on this side of the ropes." Cyrus leaned casually against a beam, tossing a grenade from hand to hand. "Heard the Phantom once killed a whole rival unit just to make a point. We should be careful about poking the bear." Dane worked his laptop, feeding scrambled orders through the Cartel's stolen comm line. "I'm in their ear now, boss. Let's see how confused they get." Outside, Jack crouched beside Bruno, rubbing the dog's thick neck. The night had settled into a tense quiet, the smell of smoke and gun oil heavy in the air. Jack's voice was low. "You hear that, boy?" Bruno gave a soft chuff. "Neither do I." Inside, Felix began to laugh softly, shoulders shaking against the ropes. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Jack stepped in, looming over him, the weight of decades of war etched into his face. "I've faced worse men in worse places. The difference is, they were smart enough to stay out of Montana." Felix's smile faltered. As the team gathered near the barn door, Reed arrived quietly, brushing pine needles from his jacket. "They're testing us," he murmured. "Little pushes, little flanks. They want to see if we're tired." Jack's mouth hardened. "We're not." Nash cracked his neck, rolling his broad shoulders. "We've got about 6 hours till sunrise. That's when they'll hit hard." Cyrus clapped his hands together. "Better rest up, boys. Big day tomorrow." Zane looked up from his screen. "Or we keep them guessing tonight." Jack raised his gaze toward the tree line, where the Phantom's silhouette still loomed like a black mark against the moon. He let out a slow breath. "Let's keep him up all night." The night deepened over the Montana Valley, the stars sharp and cold against a black sky. Inside the barn, the smell of gunpowder, blood, and damp hay hung heavy. Jack Maddox stood near the open door, one shoulder braced against the frame, his steel blue eyes scanning the dark tree line beyond the fields. Bruno lay at his feet, head resting on his paws but eyes wide open, every muscle coiled in alert stillness. Behind Jack, the barn had become a war room. Cyrus Alvarez knelt by a crate, wiping grime off his hands, his olive skin streaked with soot. "We've got maybe 6 working claymores left, a dozen tripwires and whatever little surprises I can throw together with duct tape and hope." Reed Knox leaned on a support beam, sniper rifle resting against his chest, scarred eyebrow furrowed in concentration. "They've got men probing every side, Jack. They're disciplined, not just muscle, they're trained." Zane Voss sat cross-legged by the workbench, dark eyes fixed on the flickering screen of his laptop. "I've been monitoring their channels. They know Felix is missing. Half their team is trying to track him down. The other half, they're waiting for El Fantasma's signal to hit hard." Nash Carter finished tying off a bandage on one of the wounded prisoners, exhaling slowly as he flexed his big hands. "We've got maybe 2-3 hours before they push again. We'll hold, but we're running thin." Jack turned from the door, his weathered face calm, unreadable. They've underestimated one thing, he said quietly. We're not just holding, we're cutting their legs out from under them. He stepped to the center of the barn, tapping a fresh map onto the table. Zane, feed false orders into their comms, make them think reinforcements are delayed, or flank units are retreating. Cyrus, prep the north fence and the irrigation ditch with everything you've got left. Reed, I want you on Overwatch, but stay mobile. Don't let them pin you. He met Nash's steady gaze. We're not patching up enemies tonight. Prioritize our side. If they come through the door, we drop them. Nash gave a grim nod. Understood. Jack crouched beside Bruno, rubbing the big shepherd's ears. You and me, boy. We're the last line. Bruno gave a soft chuff, eyes gleaming in the lantern light. In the corner, Felix Ruiz sat bound to a post, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cold. His eyes darted from man to man, calculating, desperate. You're all dead, he hissed. You know that, right? The Phantom doesn't leave witnesses. Jack walked over, crouched eye to eye with him. The Phantom should have stayed in the shadows. Felix's mouth twisted into a broken smile. You're a relic, old man. He's the future. Jack rose slowly. We'll see about that. Outside, the land fell into a tense, waiting silence. On the ridge, Reed shifted position, eyes sweeping the moonlit trees. His breath steamed in the cold as he whispered over the radio. They're restless, Jack. I can see their scouts jittering. They know we're bleeding them, and they don't like it. Cyrus moved like a shadow through the frozen fields, hands busy along the fence line. They want to storm the house? Let 'em. I've got a few gifts waiting. In the barn, Zane worked his digital magic, voice calm, injecting false orders. Now, they think one of their squads just pulled back from the East Ridge. Jack stood near the barn door, rifle in his hands, Bruno at his side, his silhouette sharp against the pale glow of lantern light. Good, Jack murmured. Let's make them chase their tails. Midway through the night, Jack slipped away from the barn. Bruno stayed close as they walked the edge of the pasture, boots crunching in the frost. He paused on a rise, looking down over his land fields. He had ploughed, fences he had mended, trees he had planted, and now a battlefield. Jack crouched beside Bruno, resting a hand on the dog's strong neck. This isn't what we wanted, old boy, but it's what we've got. Bruno licked Jack's hand once, quiet and steady. Back in the barn, Cyrus rejoined the team, stripping off his gloves and blowing on his hands. All set. If they breathe too hard on that fence, they'll light up the sky. Reed radioed in next, his voice edged but steady. Movement's thinning. Looks like Zane's trick worked. They're pulling back to regroup. Zane allowed himself a rare small smile. For now. Nash rolled his shoulders, exhaustion heavy in his broad frame. We'll need a rotation. If they hit again, we can't all be running on fumes. Jack stepped inside, brushing frost from his sleeves. Zane, you stay on comms. Nash, Cyrus, get an hour of shut-eye. Reed, keep watching the ridge. Bruno and I will walk the perimeter. The men nodded without argument. The bond between them was old, built in fire and war. As the barn quieted, Jack moved once more into the cold night. Bruno at his side. The moon hung low over the mountains, casting silver light over the battered fields. Smoke still rose in thin wisps from the wrecked vehicles, drifting across the frost. Jack walked the fences, fingers brushing the wood, eyes sharp on the tree line. In the distance, near the black edge of the forest, the Phantom watched a still, dark figure, arms folded, waiting. Jack murmured under his breath, "Not yet." Beside him, Bruno gave a low, steady growl. The first rays of dawn crept over the Montana ridge, casting a faint gold line across the sky, but the air was still thick with the cold bite of night. Jack Maddox stood at the northern fence line, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the tree line. Beside him, Bruno paced, nose twitching, tail stiff, every muscle wound tight. Then he saw it. A cloud of dust rising on the southern road, low at first, then thickening, dark shapes churning beneath it. Jack lowered the binoculars, exhaling slowly. He tapped his radio. "They're coming." Zane Voss's calm voice crackled back, picking up heavy chatter. Convoy size doubled. Multiple vehicles, armored. Cyrus Alvarez emerged from the barn, wiping grease off his hands, olive skin smeared with soot. "Heavies?" "Looks like it," Jack confirmed. "They're bringing everything they've got." Brad Knox's quiet voice drifted over the radio from the ridge. "I count 3 Humvees, 2 flatbeds with mounted guns, and another command truck." "They're not playing games." Nash Carter stepped from the barn, rolling his shoulders, his barrel-chested frame looming in the early light. "Good," he rumbled. "Neither are we." Inside the barn, the team gathered around the map one last time. Jack planted his palm on the weathered table. "This is it. They hit the ridge. We bottleneck them here and here." He tapped the north and south fences and forced them into the kill zone. Reed leaned over the map, scarred eyebrow raised. "I'll take the west ridge. If they swing wide, they won't see me until it's too late." Cyrus grinned as he checked his detonators. "I'll make sure the kill zone lives up to its name." Zane adjusted his laptop, fingers flicking through scrambled signals. "I'm still in their comms. If I can jam their calls for air support, we buy ourselves critical time." Nash snapped a magazine into his rifle. "And I'll hold the line at the barn. No one crosses this yard." Jack nodded, steel blue eyes sweeping his team. "Let's remind them what happens when you corner wolves." As the engines roared closer, Jack took his position on the porch. Bruno pressed to his side. He could feel the dog vibrating with tension, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Through the haze of dawn, the convoy rolled into sight. Black Humvees with armored plates, their gun turrets swinging to scan the slopes, flatbed trucks with soldiers bristling with rifles, and at the heart, the command truck, its antenna bristling like the spines of some war beast. "Reed?" Jack murmured. "Got him," came the soft reply from the ridge. "Cyrus?" "Fireworks, ready." "Sane." "Guns locked." "They're blind." "Nash?" "Standing by." Jack's lips thinned into a hard line. "Let's get to work." The first Humvee hit the narrow stretch of road Cyrus had rigged. For one suspended heartbeat, the engine roared. The tires spun. Then Cyrus squeezed the detonator. The road erupted in fire. The Humvee flipped sideways, smashing into the truck behind it. The command vehicle skidded to a stop as soldiers poured from the trucks, shouting, scrambling for cover. Reed fired once. A clean, sharp crack, and the lead gunner crumpled over his turret. Another shot, another body down. Chaos spread through the convoy. On the southern fence, Cyrus ducked and weaved through the smoke, tossing flashbangs and grenades, his laughter cutting through the radio.
"Tomboys, who wants to dance?"
At the barn, Nash slammed the butt of his shotgun into a charging fighter, knocking him flat before snapping off a controlled blast into the air. "Not today," he growled, dragging the man clear with one hand. Inside, Zane worked at a furious pace, jamming enemy signals, dropping false orders into their channels. "They're panicking," he murmured into the mic. "They've got no command." Jack stayed on the porch, rifle braced, eyes sweeping the battlefield. Bruno growled low, body stiffening. Then Jack saw him, cutting through the smoke like a dark blade. El Fantasma. He walked calmly up the center of the ruined convoy, hands folded behind his back, black coat rippling behind him. He didn't flinch when a flashbang detonated nearby, didn't duck when a stray round hissed past his ear. His mirrored glasses reflected fire and ruin. Jack's mouth tightened. "Reed," he murmured. "Can you see him?" "Clear," Reed whispered, exhaling. "Hold your shot." The Phantom raised his hand, sharp and deliberate. The remaining cartel fighters rallied, like iron filings snapping toward a magnet. They fanned out, pushing through the smoke in disciplined waves, a rolling wall of men and guns. Jack clicked his radio. Cyrus. Now. Cyrus grinned, teeth flashing. With pleasure, a second line of charges erupted across the north fence. Wood, dirt, and men flew skyward as the shockwave slammed into the tray line. The convoy shuddered to a halt, confusion rippling like panic through the ranks. "Reed," Jack murmured. "Break them." From the ridge came a measured rhythm. Crack, 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 each shot a falling body. Each shot another fracture in the cartel's resolve. Bruno leapt suddenly, teeth flashing, as a fighter burst from the smoke, rifle raised. Jack pivoted smoothly, slamming his shoulder into the man, driving him back with brutal efficiency. Bruno pinned the man down, growling deep in his chest. Jack murmured to the dog, "Good boy." As the dust began to settle, Jack raised his eyes to the ridge. El Fantasma was gone. Smoke drifted like ghosts through the battered Montana Valley as dawn turned the sky a pale gold. Jack Maddox crouched by the north fence line, his rifle resting across his knees. Bruno at his side, his sharp blue eyes, swept over the twisted wreckage of the convoy, toppled Humvees, burned-out trucks, and the sprawled bodies of men who had underestimated the wrong ranch. The radios crackled softly. "Jack!" Reed Knox's voice came from the ridge, low and urgent. "The Phantom's gone," pulled back into the trees. "I'm losing sight of him." Jack clicked the mic. "He's regrouping." Cyrus Alvarez jogged over, grinning despite the soot smudged across his olive skin. "That was a hell of a show," he panted. "But I'm down to 2 charges, and one's just a glorified firecracker." Zane Voss emerged from the barn, laptop still tucked under his arm, headphones around his neck. "I can't jam what I can't hear," he said quietly. Their radios went dark. "They're using hand signals now." Nash Carter rolled his broad shoulders as he tightened the last of the bandages on the wounded. "Then it's boots on the ground, boys." Jack stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "We take the fight to them." The team gathered at the barn. Jack spread a topographic map across the hood of a truck, finger tapping a narrow draw leading into the forest. "They've pulled back here, into the timber. High ground, cover, narrow approaches. That's where they'll hit from next." Reed leaned over the map, scarred eyebrow raised. "You want me on Overwatch?" Jack nodded. "North slope." "Zane, get eyes on the drones." "Nash, you're with me and Bruno." "Cyrus." Jack gave him a small grin. "Light up their world." Cyrus chuckled, flexing his fingers. "I was born for this." They moved out in pairs. Reed ghosted up the ridge, sniper rifles slung across his back, boots silent on the frozen earth. He slid between trees like a shadow, finding his perch beneath a fallen pine where he could see the clearing below. Cyrus slipped through the brush near the stream, planting his last charges with quick, efficient movements. "One for the road," he muttered with a grin, tucking a flashbang into his vest. Zane set up in a thicket near the barn, drone controller in hand, his dark eyes flicking between screen and horizon. "I've got eyes on thermal," he murmured. "Movement. Lots of it." Jack, with Bruno and Nash, moved up the old logging trail. Jack's boots crunched softly on frost, Bruno padding ahead, tail low, nose working the air. Nash followed close, shotgun ready, his big frame moving surprisingly light for his size. The forest closed around them, the sharp smell of pine and cold dirt filling the air. Jack crouched, raising his fist. Bruno froze. Nash stopped without a word. Voices. Not English. Jack leaned forward, peering through the branches. 6 men moved cautiously up the trail, rifles raised, eyes darting. Their body language was tight, disciplined, no panicked cartel muscle now. These were the Phantom's inner circle. Jack gestured. "Wait." Then, over the radio, "Reed, right side, 6 targets. Call it." Reed's calm voice came back. "On your count, Jack." Jack took a long breath. "Now." The first shot cracked like a whip. The lead fighter crumpled. A clean shot through the chest. The others jolted, spun, fired wildly into the trees. Nash stepped forward, shotgun, roaring once, twice, dropping two more. Bruno lunged, jaws locking onto a rifle, arm as Jack surged forward, driving his shoulder into the last fighter and slamming him hard into the earth. It was over in seconds. Jack crouched beside the last conscious man, pressing a knee into his chest. "Where's the phantom?" Jack asked softly. The man spat blood, his eyes glassy with fear. Jack's expression didn't change. He reached down, unclipped the man's radio, and handed it to Zane over the comms. "Run this." Zane's voice came back a moment later. "Encrypted, but I can trace the signal origin." Jack rose slowly, patting Bruno's side. "Let's go hunting." "At the ridge," Reed whispered through the radio. "Jack, you're not going to like this. Movement north, heavy unit, 12, maybe 15, and they've got armor." Jack's jaw tightened. "Armor? Looks like an old Soviet APC," Reed murmured. "Not fast, but plenty of teeth." Cyrus whistled low over the radio. "Well, damn, that's cheating." Jack exhaled through his nose. "Zane, can you disable that?" Zane's fingers flew over his laptop, not directly, but if you get me close, I can spike their controls. Jack gave a faint, humorless smile. "Then we get close." The forest thickened, the trees pressing close, light fading beneath the canopy. Bruno trotted at Jack's side, head low, breath steaming in the cold air. Then the ground trembled, a low rumble, steady and relentless. They reached a break in the trees and saw it. The old armored personnel carrier crawling up the ridge, its turret swinging slowly, men flanking its sides, and behind it, walking calmly through the smoke, was the Phantom. Jack lifted his radio. "Reed." "Yeah." "Boss, light him up." The Montana forest vibrated with tension. Jack Maddox crouched behind a fallen pine, eyes fixed on the slow advance of the armored personnel carrier. Bruno pressed against his leg, growling low. Through the radio, Reed Knox's calm voice came from his sniper nest on the ridge. "Jack, I've got eyes on the APC. I can take out the gunners, but the armor's gonna need something bigger." Jack murmured back, "Hold your shot, Cyrus. Status?" Cyrus Alvarez's voice was low, but buzzing with excitement. "Charges set on the old creek crossing. If we can lure that beast this way, I can bury it." Jack's steel blue eyes narrowed. "Zane." Zane Voss, crouched in the brush with his laptop, whispered, "Their comms are still dark on my end. I can hit the APC's electronics if you get me 30 feet from it. But I can't promise it'll shut the gunner down completely." Jack exhaled, slowly. "We'll take what we can get." The ground rumbled as the APC crawled forward, its turrets scanning, then flanked either side, rifles sweeping the trees, and behind it, like a shadow cast in human form, strode El Fantasma, the phantom coat billowing, mirrored glasses flashing cold silver in the pale morning light. Jack tapped the radio. "Nash, you're on flank control. Keep the infantry busy. Reed, wait for my signal. Cyrus, get ready to light the fuse. Zane, with me." As the APC crossed the rocky slope, Nash Carter barreled in from the side, his shotgun roaring. 2 cartel soldiers dropped before they could turn. Nash shouted over the roar, "Come on, boys. You want some?" He ducked behind a tree, reloading with quick, sure movements. Cyrus lay flat in the brush, eyes locked on his detonator. "Little closer," he murmured under his breath. "Come on, baby, just a little closer." Jack and Zane sprinted low across the trees, Bruno streaking ahead like a black bullet. They kept to the shadows, weaving between pine trunks, closing the gap to the APC. The noise was thunderous now, the rumble of the engine, the clank of armor over rocks, the shouted Spanish commands of the soldiers. Then Reed's voice whispered in Jack's ear. 2 on the turret. One more at 12 o'clock. Jack, call it. Jack raised his radio. Take them. Crack. Crack. 3 perfect shots. 3 bodies slumped, the gunner toppling from the turret. The APC rocked as the driver accelerated, panicking, punching through trees toward the creek crossing. Cyrus grinned like a kid on Christmas. "Oh, you're gonna love this." Bruno lunged into the clearing, snapping at a soldier's ankle. Jack was a step behind, driving his shoulder into another man's ribs, sending him sprawling. Zane skidded to a halt, fingers flying over the laptop. "Give me 10 seconds, he barked. The APC ground forward. Trees splintered. The tracks hit the edge of the creek. Cyrus's grin sharpened. Boom! He thumbed the detonator. The earth exploded. The creek bank gave way under the armored giant, collapsing it into a pit of mud, boulders and jagged timber. The turret pitched sideways, wheels spinning helplessly. The men inside shouting in panic. Smoke curled from the battered engine. Zane crouched beside the wreck, punching in the final override. Sparks showered from the comms antenna. "You're blind now," Zane muttered. The soldiers scattered, shouts rising as their armored cover crumpled. Nash surged from cover, his big frame slamming into one man, dragging him down. Reed picked off stragglers at the tree line. Cyrus sprinted toward Jack, pistol flashing, voice full of laughter. "Hot damn, you see that?" But Jack's eyes weren't on the APC. They were on the Phantom. El Fantasma stood alone on the far side of the clearing, unmoving, as the chaos swirled around him. His dark coat rippled in the cold breeze, his mirrored glasses reflecting the burning wreckage. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he raised one hand and beckoned. Jack's heart thudded. "Boys," he murmured into the radio, "this one's mine." As if sensing the shift, Bruno barked sharply, teeth bared. Jack stepped forward, rifle lowered, eyes locked on the man across the clearing. The Phantom smiled faintly, then slipped the long coat from his shoulders, revealing a black combat vest, knife strapped to one thigh, pistol holstered at his hip. No words, no signals, just 2 men, stepping into the circle drawn by fate. The air crackled with tension. Behind him, Jack heard Reed murmuring, "Jack," but he clicked the radio off. This wasn't their fight. Jack rolled his shoulders, lifted his fists, and moved forward. Bruno crouched, growling, but Jack gave a soft, quick command. "Stay." The Phantom circled slowly, the scar on his jaw catching the morning light, a faint smirk twisting his lips. Then he lunged. They collided in a whirl of fists, elbows, boots, striking dirt. The Phantom drove forward, landing a brutal hook to Jack's ribs. Jack grunted, twisting sharply, elbowing into the Phantom's jaw. They broke apart, circled again. Blood dripped from Jack's nose. The Phantom wiped a cut from his mouth, still smiling. Jack's breath came fast, but his mind was cold, precise. 60 years in his bones, 1,000 fights behind his eyes. He pivoted sharply, caught the Phantom's wrist mid-strike, twisted, drove his knee into the man's chest, and slammed him flat onto the earth. Bruno sprang forward, snarling at the Phantom's throat, but Jack's sharp whistle froze the dog mid-lunge. The Phantom coughed, rolling onto his back, breathless, defeated. His glasses lay cracked in the dirt. For the first time, Jack saw the man's eyes, dark, fierce, and full of something unexpected. Respect. Jack rose slowly, hand extended. The Phantom stared at him, chest heaving. And then, with a faint laugh, the cartel legend reached up and took Jack's hand. The forest fell still. For a long moment, all Jack Maddox could hear was the ragged breath of the Phantom and the distant crackle of burning engines. His hand was still outstretched, palm open, steady despite the tremors running through his battered body. The Phantom stared up at him, chest heaving, dark eyes sharp even behind the bruises. Then slowly, deliberately, the man reached up, clasping Jack's wrist with a grip like iron. Jack pulled him to his feet. Bruno circled warily, hackles raised, but at Jack's soft command, "Easy, boy," the big shepherd dropped his head and stepped back, panting quietly. The two men stood face to face. For the first time, Jack saw the Phantom not as a shadowy legend, but as a man mid-40s, hard lines carved into his face, scars tracing his jaw, the look of someone who had survived long enough to no longer care about death. There was no mockery now in his faint smile, only a strange, unspoken understanding. Jack's voice came low. "Enough." The Phantom gave a small nod, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. Then, astonishingly, he reached up, pulled the radio from his belt, and held it out. "Surrender. Quiet. Final." Jack took it carefully, pressing the mic to his mouth. "All units," he said softly into the open channel, "stand down." Across the valley, the chaos slowed. Cyrus Alvarez, crouched near the wrecked creek crossing, raised his head, hearing the sudden stillness through the trees. "Jack, what did you just do?" From the ridge, Reed Knox murmured through the radio. "I don't see movement." "They're pulling back." Zane Voss, crouched by his laptop, gave a low whistle. "They're falling out of comms." "They're pulling out, Jack." At the barn, Nash Carter slung his shotgun across his back, his big hands resting on his hips as he watched the last cartel soldiers disappear into the timber. "Holy hell," he muttered. He did it. Jack and the Phantom stood quietly as the forest exhaled. Around them, birds began to stir again, the smell of pine and ash drifting through the cold morning air. The Phantom spoke first, his voice rough but calm. "You've earned this place." His accent was faint but sharp, each word measured. Jack studied him for a moment. "Go home," he murmured. The Phantom gave the faintest trace of a smile. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back through the trees, his black coat trailing behind him like a shadow pulled free of the ground. Bruno leaned against Jack's leg, with a quiet whine, his flank pressed to Jack's knee. Jack reached down, fingers threading through the dog's thick fur. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice rough. In the distance, the last of the cartel engines faded. The team regrouped at the barn. Cyrus arrived first, bounding up the slope, olive skin streaked with dirt, a grin splitting his face. "Did I miss the part where the big boss just walked away?" Reed came next, slinging his rifle onto the porch, his lean frame exhausted, but eyes sharp. "You could have told us you were negotiating," he muttered with a smirk. Zane followed, laptop tucked under his arm, his quiet voice dry. "We'll need to sweep the valley." Their network went dark too cleanly. Nash brought up the rear, wiping blood from his knuckles, his broad chest heaving with deep breaths. "Who are you patching up, the prisoners or letting the sheriff handle it?" Jack leaned against the porch post, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I think they'll be long gone by the time law rolls up." Inside the barn, they gathered one last time around the old kitchen table. The map, torn and battered, still lay at the center. A half-empty pot of coffee steamed faintly beside it. Jack looked around the table. Cyrus stretched out his legs, his fingers drumming on his knee. Reed leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loosely over his chest. Zane tapped on his laptop, occasionally glancing up. Nash sipped slowly from a tin mug, his eyes half closed. Bruno lay sprawled at Jack's feet, eyes closed, tail thumping occasionally against the floorboards. Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "You came when I called." Reed lifted his mug slightly. "You'd have done the same." Cyrus chuckled. "We'll always come for the old man with the war dog." Zane gave the faintest smile. "Besides, I hate unfinished business." Nash drained his coffee and set the cup down. "We're not done, not really." Jack nodded, his gaze steady. "No, but for now, we rest." Outside, the sun crested the eastern ridge, spilling gold across the battered valley. Smoke drifted lazily from smoldering wreckage, but the air smelled of pine and earth again, not fire and blood. Jack stepped out onto the porch, hands resting on the railing, Bruno pressing against his hip. He watched the tray line for a long time, eyes sharp, calm. Somewhere out there, the Phantom walked away, leaving behind a battlefield he hadn't claimed. For now, that was enough. By mid-morning, the sheriff's convoy wound its way up the dusty gravel road, sirens quiet, red and blue lights flashing against the trees. Jack Maddox stood at the porch rail, arms crossed, watching the line of trucks and cruisers snake through the valley. Bruno lay at his feet, tail thumping against the boards. Behind Jack, the farmhouse had been transformed into a makeshift command post. Cyrus Alvarez lounged on the steps, grinning as he watched the deputies' wide-eyed faces. Reed Knox stood by the barn, rifle slung casually over his shoulder, his scarred eyebrow raised in faint amusement. Zane Voss leaned against a fence post, tapping calmly on his laptop. Headphones resting around his neck, Nash Carter sat on an upturned crate, hands bandaged, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. Sheriff Tom Weller climbed out of the lead vehicle, boots crunching on gravel. He was a thick-set man with a grizzled grey mustache, sharp brown eyes, and a heavy badge on his chest. "Jack," Weller called, tipping his hat. "Want to explain why I got calls about a war zone up here?" Jack gave a faint smile, took care of itself. Weller let out a long, slow breath, glancing at the wrecked vehicles, the scorched earth, the blood-streaked dirt. His men fanned out cautiously, checking the perimeter, but it was clear they were late to the fight. "Damn it, Jack," Weller muttered. "You could have called us." Jack shrugged. "You'd have been writing body bags, Tom." Weller scratched his chin. "I suppose I should thank you." Jack tilted his head. "You just did." As the sheriff's deputies secured the site, Cyrus wandered over, hands stuffed in his pockets, grin still wide. "So, we heroes now? Or just annoying legends?" Reed smirked faintly. "Probably both." Zane didn't look up from his laptop. "We should wipe our footprints before the FBI gets curious." Nash took a long sip of coffee. "Agreed." Jack raised a hand. "We clean it up. But we don't vanish. We stand here. We own this." Inside the barn, Felix Ruiz still sat zip-tied to the post, bruised and beaten, but alive. Sheriff Weller walked in, eyebrows rising. "Well, well, if it isn't Mexico's most wanted on a Montana ranch." Felix glared, lips tight. Weller turned to Jack with a shake of his head. "You've got strange hobbies, Jack." Jack leaned against the barn wall. "He's your problem now." Felix laughed softly, bitter and hollow. "You think this ends with me? You think El Fantasma just walks away?" Jack crouched in front of him, eyes steady. "He already did." Felix's face twisted in rage, but his shoulders sagged. By noon, the cleanup was underway. Deputies catalogued weapons, marked blast sites, and roped off the remains of the cartel's vehicles. Cyrus helped them find the last booby traps with far too much enthusiasm. Reed guided the sharpshooters through the perimeter, offering quiet pointers. Zane pulled Felix's comms network apart, disabling trackers and wiping files. Nash and Bruno walked the property line together, Nash's big hand occasionally resting on the dog's head as they moved. Jack stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the sun rise higher, his mind heavy with the weight of what came next. Later, on the porch, Sheriff Weller joined Jack, offering a flask. Jack accepted it without a word, taking a slow sip. "I've known you a long time, Jack," Weller murmured, watching the deputies work. "But this was different." Jack said quietly, "They forced my hand." Weller nodded. "I know, and I'll cover what I can. But you've stirred up a hornet's nest." Jack gave a faint, tired smile. "So what's new?" As the afternoon stretched on, the team gathered around the fire pit. The smoke from their coffee drifted up into the clean mountain air. Cyrus leaned back on a log, arms stretched wide. "We're still alive." "That's a win." Reed cleaned his rifle methodically. "For now." Zane scrolled through reports on his tablet. Interpol chatter says the Phantom vanished after this, off the grid. Nash poked at the fire with a stick, his face thoughtful. "Maybe that's the real win." Jack sat quietly, fingers resting on Bruno's head, watching the flames dance. "We did what we came to do," Jack murmured. "We held this place. We reminded them they can't just roll over people because they're quiet, because they're small, because they're alone." The men fell into a comfortable silence, the kind only earned on the far side of chaos. As the sun slipped low, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose, Jack rose, brushing dust from his jeans. Bruno stood with him, tail wagging faintly. Jack looked around at his team. "You're always welcome here," he said quietly. Reed gave a sharp nod. Cyrus grinned. Zane lifted 2 fingers in a casual salute. Nash clapped Jack on the shoulder with a quiet laugh. One by one, they drifted toward their trucks, gear slung over their backs, engines growling to life as they rolled down the long gravel drive. Jack stood alone at the porch rail. Bruno pressed against his hip. The valley was quiet again, just the whisper of the wind through the pines and the distant call of a hawk overhead. He watched until the last truck taillights vanished down the road. Then he turned, walked inside, and shut the door. For now, at least, the war was over. The following morning, Jack Maddox awoke to a silence he hadn't heard in days. No gunfire crackling across the ridge. No engines roaring up the gravel road, just the soft creak of old floorboards, the distant lowing of cattle, and the slow, steady breathing of Bruno at the foot of his bed. Jack sat up slowly, stretching his sore shoulders. He ran a weathered hand over his face, felt the stiffness in his ribs, and allowed himself a tired smile. They'd made it. He rose, pulling on his faded green flannel shirt, the fabric soft from years of wear. Bruno thumped his tail against the floor, rising with a stretch and a yawn. Jack ruffled the dog's ears. "Let's check the fences, old boy." Outside, the land was still scarred. Blackened patches of earth marked where the convoy had burned. Deep gouges cut into the dirt from the armored vehicle's tracks. The north fence hung broken, the gate twisted from the blast. But the morning light softened the edges, painting the pasture in warm gold. Jack walked the perimeter with Bruno at his side, boots crunching on frost-hardened grass. He paused at the old creek crossing, crouching to run his fingers over the earth, where Cyrus's charges had collapsed the bank. The scent of scorched wood still clung to the air, but underneath it, the familiar smell of pine and damp earth was returning. Bruno snuffled at a spot near the trees, ears flicking, then trotted back, satisfied. Jack rose, brushing dirt from his hands. "We'll fix it up," he murmured. Back at the farmhouse, Jack brewed a pot of coffee, the familiar clink of the tin pot grounding him in a way few things could. He carried 2 mugs onto the porch, one in each hand. Sheriff Tom Weller was already there, leaning against the rail, his hat pulled low over his brow. Jack handed him a mug without a word. Weller took it, nodding his thanks. Together they stood in companionable silence, watching the sun rise over the ridge. "They left clean," Weller said finally. "No bodies on the road, no fires in the next town over, just gone." Jack sipped his coffee. "They got what they came for." Weller gave a quiet snort. "Did they?" Jack's mouth twitched in a faint, knowing smile. Inside the barn, the morning light fell across abandoned gear. A strip of duct tape on the wall still marked the last ammo count. A battered medical kit sat open on the workbench, a reminder of Nash's steady hands. Zane's spare cables hung coiled on a nail, and Reed's spent casings glimmered faintly in the dirt outside. Jack moved through the space, slowly, gathering stray items, folding up the map, wiping down the table. Bruno padded along behind him, tail swishing softly. By the time he finished, the barn looked like what it was meant to be again, a place for work, not war. In the afternoon, Jack drove into town. People watched him as he passed, not with suspicion or fear, but with quiet respect. A few lifted their hands in greeting, others simply nodded. Jack gave them a faint tip of his hat, driving the old truck slowly down Main Street, Bruno's head hanging out the passenger window. He stopped by the feed store, The hardware shop, the small market. Conversations were short, eyes a little wider than usual, but no one asked too many questions. By evening, the farmhouse truck bed was loaded with supplies, fencing, nails, seed, fresh coffee beans. That night, Jack sat on the porch steps, Bruno's head resting on his knee. He watched the sun slip behind the ridge, casting the valley in a soft wash of purple and gold. For the first time in a long while, his mind was still. No plans, no threats, just the quiet, the land and the dog at his side. As the first stars blinked into the sky, Jack murmured, "We held it, boy." Bruno lifted his head, gave a soft huff, then settled back down. Back inside, Jack pulled an old photo from the shelf. A younger version of himself stared back. Uniform crisp, a unit patch on his shoulder, arms around men whose faces were now scattered across the world. Some alive, some lost. Brothers. He traced a thumb over the edge of the frame, then set it gently back. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. In a quiet house in a quiet valley, Jack Maddox leaned back in his chair. Bruno stretched out at his feet and allowed himself to believe, if only for one night, that the storm had passed. The next morning, Jack Maddox rose early, as he always had, long before the sun touched the valley. Bruno padded beside him through the cold farmhouse, nails tapping softly on the floorboards. Outside, the air smelled clean, pine, frost, and the faintest trace of ash fading from the earth. Jack poured a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. He leaned against the rail, steel-blue eyes sweeping across the land, the scars of battle already softened by the breath of winter. The north fence was still broken. The soil near the creek churned, but the sky was wide and clear. Bruno settled at his feet, tail brushing the planks. Jack reached down, absently scratching the dog's thick neck. For a while, there was only the quiet. By mid-morning, Jack was in the pasture repairing fence posts, sleeves rolled up, hands wrapped in weathered gloves. Bruno lay under a tree nearby, tongue lolling, ears pricked. Jack sank the post into the hole, tightened the wire and paused, resting his arms on the top rail. His breath puffed in the cold air. Then he heard it, the distant hum of engines. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing toward the road that cut through the trees. Dust rose on the horizon. Jack gave a sharp whistle. Bruno jumped to his feet at once. Alert, Jack moved calmly but quickly, stripping off the gloves and grabbing the rifle, leaning against the fence. The convoy came into view, but it wasn't the cartel. Sheriff Tom Weller's truck led the line, followed by 3 black SUVs, government plates gleaming, and a military Humvee bringing up the rear. Jack sighed softly. "Looks like our vacation's over," he murmured, patting Bruno's side. They pulled up near the barn, tires crunching on gravel. Weller climbed out first, hat in hand, face lined with apology. Behind him stepped 2 men and a woman. Dark suits, cold eyes, the kind that didn't belong anywhere near Montana. The last to emerge was a lean man in fatigues, short cropped silver hair, a special operations patch on his shoulder. His expression was flat, but not hostile. "Jack Maddox," the lead agent said briskly, extending a badge. "Agent Cole, Homeland Security." Jack gave him a long, level look, then nodded once, arms folded. "We're here to debrief you," Cole continued smoothly. "There's been chatter across half a dozen borders since the incident." Jack's mouth twitched in something not quite a smile. "Which incident?" Cole didn't blink. "You know which one." Inside the barn, the team set up a small command center, laptops, radios, coffee brewing in a thermos. Bruno circled the strangers warily, finally settling near Jack's feet, golden eyes fixed on the suits. Cole tapped a file on the table. "We've confirmed Elephantasma's withdrawal, but it's not over. You left a crater, Jack, and they'll want to know why." Jack's voice was low. "They know why." The man in fatigues, Major Logan, spoke next, arms folded across his chest. "They're calling you the Ghost of Montana." Words spreading. You made a point that's going to echo a lot farther than you think. Jack met his eyes. I didn't do it for a headline. Logan gave a small, grim smile. That's why it worked. Outside, Sheriff Weller leaned on the hood of his truck, watching the feds work with quiet weariness. Jack joined him after a while, coffee mug in hand. They going to leave you alone after this? Weller asked. Jack shrugged. Doubt it. The sheriff gave a low chuckle. You should have just retired and raised chickens. Jack sipped his coffee. Never liked chickens. By late afternoon, the agents packed up their laptops, shut their files, and gave clipped nods of farewell. Only Major Logan lingered, walking back to the porch, as the others loaded into the trucks. He paused at the steps, glancing at Bruno, then at Jack. You ever need a favor, Maddox? Logan said quietly. You've got friends in places most people don't. Jack tilted his head slightly. I've got friends right here. Logan smiled faintly, offered a hand. Jack shook it firmly. And then they were gone, engines fading down the long gravel road. As the sun dipped low, Jack stood in the pasture once more, hammer in hand, Bruno beside him. The land was still scarred, but it was healing. The fences would be mended, the soil would settle, and Jack would endure. He drove the last post into the ground, wiped his forehead, and looked out across the valley, the place he had fought for, bled for, defended when no one else would. Bruno leaned against his leg, quiet and steady. Jack murmured, "Home, boy." They walked back together as the light faded, the farmhouse glowing warm against the dark. Jack Maddox rose before dawn. The farmhouse was still, the air inside cool and faintly scented with pinwood. He poured a mug of coffee, the ritual smooth from years of repetition, and stood at the window as the first light crept across the valley. Outside, frost silvered the grass. The mountains loomed against a soft violet sky, the forest's dark silhouette stretching down to meet the pastures. Bruno stirred near the door, yawning wide, tail thumping against the floor. Jack smiled faintly. Morning, old boy. They stepped onto the porch together. The boards creaked softly under Jack's boots. He rested a hand on Bruno's head, the dog leaning into the touch. For the first time in days, there was no smell of smoke, no shout of orders over radios, no gunfire breaking the dawn. But Jack's steel blue eyes were wary, because in his world, peace never lasted long. By mid-morning, Jack was mending fences in the north pasture. The broken posts, splintered during the battle, now lay stacked in a neat pile. Bruno kept watch nearby, his gaze flicking between the tree line and his master. Jack's muscles moved with practiced efficiency, driving nails into the fresh beams, pulling the wire taut. His thoughts drifted as his hands worked, to the phantom walking away, to the agents who had come and gone, to the strange quiet that had settled over his land. The radio in his pocket crackled to life. "Jack," came the familiar voice of Sheriff Weller. "We need to talk." Jack paused, hammer raised midair. "Go ahead, Tom." "I just got word. State police found a body near the highway. Mexican cartel tattoo, execution style. Looks like your Phantom's cleaning house." Jack's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the trees, scanning the dark line of pine and shadow. "Tell your men to stay out of the woods, Tom," Jack said quietly. "He's not finished yet." That evening, the wind picked up, rattling the eaves of the farmhouse. Jack sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle with steady, precise movements. Bruno lay near the stove, ears flicking at every gust. A knock came at the door. Jack rose, crossing the room in 2 strides. When he opened it, Sheriff Weller stood on the porch, rain dampening his hat, his face drawn. "Jack," Weller said softly, "I need you to come down to town." Jack arched a brow. "What's wrong?" Weller hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "Someone's been asking around. A stranger, ex-military type. Not one of your boys." Jack's eyes sharpened. "Cartel? Maybe. Maybe not." Weller's voice dropped. But you need to see him. Jack left Bruno behind, locking the farmhouse carefully before sliding into his old truck. The drive into town was slow, rain smearing the windshield, the wipers a steady rhythm against the glass. Main Street was quiet. The few diners and hardware stores were shuttered for the night, lights dimmed behind drawn blinds. Weller waited near the sheriff's office, arms folded across his chest, a cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. Inside, a man sat in one of the holding chairs, mid-40s, weathered face, buzzed blonde hair, lean build, military bearing. His jacket bore no insignia, but Jack didn't need one. He knew the type. The man rose as Jack entered, extending a hand. "Name's Wyatt Kane," he said in a low voice. "Heard you've been busy up here?" Jack shook the hand briefly, expression cool. "Who sent you?" Wyatt smiled faintly. "Nobody. I work for myself now, but word spreads. Maddox, the Phantom walked away from you. That's a hell of a thing." Jack studied him. "What do you want?" Wyatt leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming. "I'm putting together a team." Jack shook his head once. "Not interested." Wyatt smirked. "You sure?" "Because I don't think the storm's passed. Maddox, the cartel didn't just lose soldiers here. They lost face, and in their world, that's worse." Jack's mouth tightened. "I'll handle my own." Wyatt shrugged, hands raised. "Suit yourself." He turned to go, then paused. "But if you change your mind, you know how to find me." Jack drove home through the rain, headlights cutting a pale path through the dark. Bruno greeted him at the porch, tail wagging slowly, head tilted in quiet question. "We're fine," Jack murmured, scratching the dog's ears. "For now." The next day dawned cold and sharp. Jack moved through his chores, repairing fences, stacking firewood, tending the cattle with his usual quiet focus. But his mind was elsewhere. Midway through the afternoon, Zane's number flashed on Jack's phone. "Jack," Zane's voice came through the line, calm but edged. "I tapped into a few chatter networks. You're right. The cartel's not done. Word is, they're sending a cleaner team. Professionals." Jack's eyes narrowed. "When?" Zane's voice dropped. "Soon." Jack hung up, exhaled slowly, and looked at Bruno. "Get ready, boy." That night, the wind howled through the valley. Jack sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees. Bruno pressed against his side. The moon rode high and cold above the trees, casting silver light over the battered fields. In the stillness, he heard it. Engines, distant, approaching. Jack rose smoothly, pressing a hand to Bruno's head. "Let's go." The first vehicle crept into the clearing, a black SUV, lights off, tires crunching softly over gravel. Another followed, then another. Shadows moved behind the windows, dark figures slipping from the doors. Jack moved like a ghost through his own land, silent as the wind, Bruno a dark shape at his heel. From the ridge, Reed's voice cracked through Jack's earpiece. 3 SUVs, 9 men, heavy gear. Jack clicked his mic. "I see them." Cyrus's voice came next, low and eager. "Want me to light 'em up?" "Not yet," Jack murmured. "Let them come." The intruders swept through the pasture, rifles raised, movements sharp and practiced. One approached the barn, another circled toward the house. 2 flanked the west line. Jack waited. When the first man stepped onto the porch, Jack moved, like a hammer falling. He caught the man's wrist, twisted hard, drove a knee into his chest, and slammed him into the post. Bruno lunged, driving another attacker back into the dirt. A sharp command. "Bruno, heel." Pulled the dog back just as gunfire cracked through the night. Cyrus's charges blew on the north line, sending 2 SUVs spinning into the ditch. Reed's rifle barked once, twice, 3 times, each shot clean, measured, devastating. Inside the barn, Zane's fingers danced across his keyboard, jamming signals, cutting comms, throwing static into the attacker's ears. And at the heart of it all, Jack Maddox moved through the dark like a storm unleashed. When the smoke cleared, the last man standing dropped his rifle, hands raised, eyes wide with something between fear and awe. Jack stepped forward, boots crunching over gravel, Bruno pressed at his side, teeth bared. The man swallowed hard. "We were told you were just a farmer." Jack's voice was quiet, almost kind. "You were told wrong." By dawn, the valley was silent once more. Jack stood on the porch, watching as the first light broke across the ridge. The team gathered around him, Reed leaning on the rail, Cyrus bouncing on the balls of his feet, Zane calmly dismantling his gear, Nash wiping blood from his knuckles with a damp cloth. Bruno lay at Jack's feet, tongue lolling, tail thumping softly. Jack took a long, slow breath. The storm had come. The storm had passed. For now, by late afternoon, a thin layer of mist rolled down from the mountains, settling over Jack Maddox's land like a quiet veil. The farmhouse stood calm against the backdrop of battered pastures and smoke-scarred fence lines. But inside, the tension was coiled tight. Jack sat at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, forearms resting on the wood. His steel blue eyes were fixed on the map spread before him, topographic lines, choke points, ridges and gullies marked in red pencil. Beside him, a steaming mug of coffee sat untouched, cooling in the dim light. Bruno lay under the window, eyes half closed, but his ears flicked at every sound. Nash Carter stood at the counter, methodically sharpening a long hunting knife. The metallic rasp of stone on steel echoed softly through the room. Cyrus Alvarez lounged in a chair near the door, booted feet propped on a crate, tossing a small grenade from hand to hand with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Zane Voss hunched over his laptop on the far side of the room, dark fingers tapping across the keys, his brows furrowed in deep concentration. And on the porch, Reed Knox cleaned his rifle in the fading light, the scar through his eyebrows stark against his weathered skin. Jack's voice broke the silence. "Zane, give it to me, straight." Zane didn't look up. "They're coming. Bigger push. They've got eyes in the nearest town. They know last night didn't break you." Jack's fingers curled briefly into a fist on the table. "How big?" Zane exhaled through his nose. 12 men minimum, probably more. Contractors, ex-military, and they're not going to pull back this time. Cyrus's grin sharpened. Finally, I was getting bored. Nash shot him a flat look. "You're the only person I know who smiles when we're outnumbered." Cyrus chuckled, rolling the grenade over his knuckles. "It's a gift." Jack's gaze swept the room. "Reed." The sniper's calm voice floated in from the porch. "If they come over the west ridge, I can hold them." For a while, Jack gave a single nod. "All right, we hold the house. We hold the land." Bruno lifted his head, tail thumping once against the floor. Jack reached down, fingers brushing over the dog's thick fur. "You with me, old boy?" Bruno gave a soft woof, his eyes bright. The sun dipped below the mountains, casting the valley in long bands of purple and gold. Jack and his team moved with quiet efficiency, preparing the ground like a ritual. Cyrus rigged the south fence with homemade explosives, his face lit by the faint glow of a headlamp. Reed climbed the west ridge, settling into his sniper's nest, with the smooth grace of a man who had done this 100 times before. Zane wired motion sensors near the creek bed, murmuring softly to himself as he worked. Nash stocked the barn with medical supplies, laying out tourniquets and field dressings in careful rows. Jack walked the perimeter with Bruno, boots crunching over the frost-hardened ground. His eyes swept the darkening tree line, every shadow weighed, every sound measured. At the far edge of the pasture, Jack paused, resting a hand on the fence rail. He looked out across the land, the scars of battle, the mended fences, the bloodstains washed clean by rain. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. Then he turned and walked back to the house. Night fell like a shroud. The first sign came just before midnight. the faint, almost imperceptible rumble of engines in the distance. Jack heard it before anyone else. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Bruno pressed against his leg and listened. Cyrus appeared at his shoulder, eyes gleaming in the dark. "You hear that?" Jack gave a short nod. Nash came up from the barn, shotgun cradled in his arms, face grim. Zane emerged from the house, pushing his glasses up his nose, the glow of his laptop still faint on his face. Reed's voice crackled softly over the radio. "Contact. West Ridge. Convoy. 3 trucks. 1 Humvee. Foot soldiers fanning out." Jack lifted the radio. "On my count." The trucks rolled into the clearing. Headlights doused, engines low and growling, dark figures spilled from the backs. Rifles raised, body armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. At the ridge, Reed exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. Crack. The lead soldier dropped, a clean shot through the head. The clearing erupted into chaos. Cyrus's charges on the south fence blew, sending 2 men flying backward in a spray of dirt and fire. Nash met the flankers at the barn, shotgun roaring in the dark, the thud of bodies hitting the ground echoing like drumbeats. Zane fed false signals into the attackers' comms, jamming their calls for backup, filling their radios with static and ghost commands. And Jack was the storm at the center of the battlefield. He moved through the dark with Bruno at his side, rifle sharp and precise, boots silent over the frozen earth. He was a shadow, a whisper, a reckoning. At one point, a figure lunged at Jack from the side, knife flashing in the moonlight. Bruno hit him first, teeth clamping on the man's forearm, dragging him to the ground. Jack finished it with a swift blow to the temple, murmuring to the dog, "Good boy." Cyrus's laughter crackled over the radio. "Oh, I missed this." Nash's voice came next, tight and focused. "South flank clear. For now," Reed whispered. "West Ridge holding." "But they're probing, Jack." "Smart." Jack's jaw tightened. "They'll push harder." Hours blurred into a pulse of gunfire, shouted commands, and the sharp rhythm of survival. By the time the first streaks of dawn touched the sky, the attackers were in retreat, bloodied, scattered, the vehicles burning in the clearing. Jack stood at the center of it all, chest heaving, rifle hanging loosely at his side. Bruno pressed against his leg, panting, ears flicking at every sound. Nash emerged from the barn, wiping blood from his knuckles, his face streaked with dirt. Cyrus appeared near the creek, grinning wide, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol. Reed descended from the ridge, rifle slung over his shoulder, his gait steady despite the exhaustion. Zane closed his laptop with a soft click, rubbing his eyes under his glasses. They gathered on the porch as the sun rose, casting long golden rays over the battered land. Jack looked at each of them in turn. Without a word, they nodded. As the team rested, Jack walked the field alone, Bruno at his heel. He moved among the wreckage, checking for survivors, pulling weapons from cold hands, dragging unconscious men into the clearing for the sheriff to deal with later. At the far end of the pasture, he found the last of them. A young soldier, maybe no older than 20, trembling as he fumbled with a sidearm. Jack crouched in front of him, calm, measured. "Go home," Jack murmured. The boy's breath hitched. I was told you were just a farmer." Jack's mouth curved in something like a smile. "Most days I am." The boy dropped the gun. Jack rose, turned, and walked away without looking back. By mid-morning, the sheriff's convoy arrived. Tom Weller climbed out, looking older than Jack remembered, his face lined with fatigue. "You alive, Maddox?" Jack gave him a faint smile. "Still here, Tom." Weller took in the wreckage. The bodies, the men gathered on the porch. "Damn it, Jack. You always did know how to draw attention." Jack spread his hands. "Didn't ask for it." Weller snorted softly, then clapped Jack on the shoulder. "I know." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the mountains, Jack sat on the porch steps, boots dusty, hands scraped raw, Bruno's head resting on his knee. Reed, Cyrus, Zane, and Nash sat nearby, drinks in hand, the kind of silence between them that only came after war. Jack lifted his glass. To the ones who stand when others run. The glasses raised, the sun dipped, and for a little while they let the world fall quiet. The Montana Valley stretched out in the pale gold of morning, a soft mist rolling down from the mountains, touching the fields, like the breath of some old god. Jack Maddox stood at the pasture's edge, hands braced on the fence rail, boots dug into the frost-hardened earth. His steel blue eyes swept the land, the scars of battle, the twisted fence posts, the blackened remains of burned vehicles, but also the stubborn signs of life, cattle grazing in the distance, the wind rippling through the pines, the faint chorus of birds returning to the trees. Beside him, Bruno sat tall, ears forward, nose lifted to the wind. Jack reached down, fingers brushing over the thick fur. "We made it, old boy." Bruno gave a soft huff, pressing against his leg. For the first time in weeks, Jack allowed himself a breath that wasn't weighted down with calculation, threat, or fear. But in the back of his mind, something old stirred, the part of him that had learned long ago to never truly rest. Back at the farmhouse, the team stirred slowly to life. Reed Knox leaned against the porch rail, sipping black coffee, his scarred eyebrow lifting slightly as Jack approached. "Sleep, Maddox." Jack gave a faint grunt. "Enough." Cyrus Alvarez sat cross-legged on the steps, polishing a pistol, his olive skin smudged with old soot, a grin playing at his mouth. "Hell of a party you throw, Jack. Should do it every spring." Zane Voss leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, dark eyes calm behind thin glasses. Intel chatter's gone quiet. For now, Nash Carter emerged from the barn, big hands wiping down a length of rope, his sandy blonde hair damp from washing up. "Town's talking," he rumbled. "They know something went down." Jack's mouth twitched in the barest smile. "Small town. Word travels." The sheriff's convoy came just before noon. Tom Weller climbed out of his truck, boots crunching over gravel, a tired smile under his grey mustache. "You're a hard man to kill, Jack." Jack shrugged. "Never gave anyone permission." Weller surveyed the team, the battered farmhouse, the scarred land. His voice lowered. "State boys want to talk. FBI too. They want to know how a handful of veterans ran a cartel out of Montana." Jack arched a brow. "Tell them it's bad manners to trespass." Weller chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'll do what I can. But Jack, they're not just going to walk away." Jack met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "They never do." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, the team gathered around the old fire pit. Someone, probably Cyrus, had dragged out a crate of beers. Reed cleaned his rifle, with quiet focus. Zane monitored a small radio, fingers tapping a soft rhythm. Nash tended the fire, big hands steady as he worked the wood into glowing embers. Bruno lay sprawled near Jack, tail thumping faintly, ears twitching at the crackle of flames. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Cyrus lifted his bottle in a casual toast. "To the ghosts that didn't get us." Reed smirked faintly. "Yet," Nash rumbled a low laugh. "Give them time." Zane's voice was dry. "Statistically speaking, they're overdue." Jack's mouth curved in a rare, quiet smile. "We're still here." They clinked bottles, the firelight flickering across faces lined by war and survival. After midnight, the team drifted off in twos and threes, finding sleep in the barn, on the porch, or stretched out in the back of trucks. Jack sat alone by the fire, Bruno's head resting on his boot. Above them, the sky was a cold sprawl of stars, sharp and endless. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced loosely. His eyes reflected the firelight, but his mind drifted far beyond, to men lost in deserts and jungles, to brothers who hadn't made it home, to the long, brutal years that had shaped him into what he was. Bruno shifted slightly, sighing against his leg. Jack reached down, scratching the dog's ears. "We are just old war dogs, huh, boy?" The dog gave a soft chuff. The next morning arrived with a surprising softness. Jack rose early, moving through the farmhouse. Like a man relearning quiet, he brewed coffee, the rich scent filling the air. He fried eggs in an iron skillet, the sound of sizzling breaking the silence. He set plates on the table, simple, solid, real. One by one, they came in, Reed with a nod, Cyrus with a grin, Zane with a murmured thanks, Nash with a clap on the shoulder. They ate like men who'd shared foxholes, not just a kitchen, without ceremony, without waste, with a quiet respect baked into every motion. When the plates were cleared and the coffee gone, Jack leaned back, arms folded. "We can call this done," he said quietly. "Or," he added, "we can wait." Reed arched a brow. "You think they'll come again?" Jack's mouth tightened. "They always come again." Nash stretched his broad shoulders, voice low and thoughtful. "Then we wait." Cyrus slapped his hands on the table, grinning. "I'm in." Zane closed his laptop with a soft click. "Already was." Jack gave a short nod. "All right, then." Days passed. The fences were mended, the barn repaired. The land, stubborn as the men who held it, began to heal. In town, whispers spread about the veterans on the old Maddox farm, about the night the cartel fled the valley, about the men who had stood when no one else would. Jack moved through it all like a quiet storm, fixing, rebuilding, preparing, but always, always watching the tree line. One afternoon, a black SUV pulled up the long gravel road. Jack stepped out onto the porch, Bruno at his side, rifle slung loose across his shoulder. Wyatt Kane stepped from the driver's seat, the ex-operator, the man who had offered Jack a place on his shadow team weeks before. His face was shadowed by a ball cap, his stance easy but alert. "Jack," he called, lifting a hand. "Got room for one more?" Jack's mouth twitched in faint amusement. "You sure you were ready for quiet?" Wyatt smiled. "Hell no." Jack stepped off the porch, boots crunching softly over dirt, and offered his hand. Wyatt shook it firmly, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Welcome to Montana," Jack murmured. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Jack walked the land once more, down past the creek, across the pasture, along the northern ridge. Bruno trotted at his heel, tail wagging, nose busy in the grass. He paused at the edge of the woods, resting a hand on the old fence rail. For a long time he just stood there, watching the wind ripple through the trees, feeling the earth under his boots, the pull of gravity, the ache in his bones. He felt the scars inside and out, but he also felt the weight of something deeper. Belonging. That night, a quiet celebration stirred at the farm. Reed tuned the radio to an old country station, the music drifting over the fields. Cyrus roasted meat over a fire, his laughter carrying in bursts through the dark. Nash carved wood on the porch steps, humming under his breath. Zane and Wyatt sat near the barn, deep in talk over a laptop and a battered map. Jack watched it all from the porch, one knee propped on the railing. Bruno stretched out at his feet. He lifted his glass to the ones who stayed. The others raised theirs, voices soft in the night. To the ones who stayed. The moon rose, fat and golden, painting the land in silver. For the first time in a long, long while, Jack let himself believe.